Tonight, we wouldn't to count the pharaohs one by one or list every stone stacked under the desert sun. Instead, we'll step into a village of dust and straw, where mornings are measured not by bells or clocks, but by the slow descent of a shadow across pale limestone. Here, the day begins before the heat claims its dominion, while the air still feels almost kind. Fires wake reluctantly, sandals wait to be found, and the quiet hum of ovens carries like a lullaby for embers. Life is tied together with simple knot spells against gravity, bread against hunger, and sweat against time itself. The pyramid grows, not from one man's strength, but from thousands of small rituals repeated until they feel eternal. So lower the lights, let the weight of stone press gently on your chest, and if your breathing begins to match the slow rhythm of footsteps carrying blocks into the horizon, that's just the night reminding you how long endurance can last. If quiet journeys like this keep you company, you might consider subscribing. And if you share the time and place you're listening from, perhaps the next fire lit at dawn in a worker's village will be waiting for you there. And when the embers settle into ash, the story does not end. It drifts forward, carried on the breath of the desert wind, into the rhythm of another day. Just as shadows crawl back across limestone, and footsteps return to the same worn paths, so too does memory circle back, always building, always enduring. If you follow it closely enough, the hum of ovens becomes a chorus, the dust becomes a veil, and the rising sun itself feels like a silent overseer. The workers' lives are written not in ink, but in sweat and stone. The day of a pyramid builder was organized by the angle of a shadow on a wall, the closest thing they had to a clock. The shadow slid down a limestone face, slow and obedient, and when it reached the little notch, it was time to wake the patient fire, shake the dust out of a reed mat, and search for sandals that were never quite where they should be. The village remained quiet except for someone coaxing a small clay oven with a breathy hum that sounded like a lullaby for embers. Faces were washed with water that tasted faintly of yesterday's jar. A simple knot was tied again and again, day after day, a private treaty between the belt and gravity. It was early. The air was cool and meant well, though it would not for long. The overseer likes to say that sand is only lazy if you let it be. You are not sure what that means, but you nod. Everyone nods. You shoulder your tools, a wooden mallet with dents that line up like lunar phases, a copper chisel smaller than you prefer, a cord coated in red ochre for snapping straight lines, and a little pouch of odds that might impress a beetle but not a god. The sun is still a rumor on the horizon. Someone coughs. Someone else tells the same story about a crocodile that ate a tax collector's sandals and spared the man, which is considered proof of cosmic justice. You've heard the story enough times that you know exactly where to smile. It requires no energy and offends no one. Breakfast is a negotiation between your jaw and dry bread. The bread is sturdy on purpose, the way a door is sturdy. It is made of emmer flour, which is to say of patience, and baked in dome-shaped clay molds that flirt with burning as a lifestyle. You dip it in beer. The beer is more soup than celebration, a dependable brown river in a jar, cloudy with grain and optimism. If you close your eyes, you can almost taste last harvest's barley. This is the smoothest part of the day, and it lasts about as long as it took for me to say that. On the way to the site, the line of workers elongates and contracts like a snake that agrees to be a rope. The ground has no intention of helping, but the air pretends. A scribe waits with his reed pen, making tiny black-topped marks on a list that will eventually fold into a basket with the accuracy of all baskets. By first light, you are a small dot next to a large plan. The slope of the ramp is an argument between engineers and donkeys, and the donkeys win by refusing to participate. You start with stone and end with more stone, which is predictable and comforting. The wooden sledge looks innocent when it is empty and philosophical when it is not. The trick, learned from someone's grandfather who learned it from sand itself, is water. A jar bearer pours water in front of the runners, just enough to coax the grains into cooperation. The sand sighs and stills friction's gentle map, and the sledge glides in a way that feels, briefly, like magic that respects physics. The man who pours is oddly proud of his job because he gets to look forward instead of down. Micro hook for the alert listener if you're taking notes. The pouring jar is made of clay that remembers heat better than people remember names, and the water is rationed because even miracles have budgets. Tugging a sledge is not complicated unless you try to think about it while doing it. 40 hands on a rope made of palm fiber, twisted so it sings a little when it stretches. Someone puts down a drum beat that is less music than math. 2 steps, a lean, a grunt so synchronized it might be an oath. The foreman calls out numbers that descend like stairs, 10, 9, 8, and you wonder where the stairs lead. At 5, he flings his switch through the air, not to strike anyone, but to underline the sentence. The sentence is always the same. Do not let the stone think. The stone is heavy but suggestible. The moment it hesitates, everything doubles. Children in the village later will make toys out of discarded fibers, small ropes for imaginary sledges. Because play is rehearsal for a job they already suspect they will get. Mid-morning, the heat arrives with no apology. It tastes like baked limestone and bright tin. Your eyes narrow until they feel like knotted string. The coal you streaked under your eyelids helps exactly as much as tradition suggests, and not a grain more, though you wear it anyway, because your grandmother said it made the sun feel watched. The surface crew keeps the face of the blocks honest. They strike with dolerite pounders, dark stones that look born to hit other stones, and produce a halo of chips that tinkle like polite applause. The surveyor, a man whose job is the opposite of enthusiasm, checks alignments with a plumb bob. He believes in gravity the way other men believe in stories. He is rarely wrong. At midday, the shadow reaches another notch on the limestone, and the world goes slightly gray around the edges. A jar of beer makes its way down the line, heavy and determined, like an uncle insisting on a second story you didn't ask for. Someone breaks bread with a thumb and offers half to a friend as if the half is equal to the whole. Saltfish appears, which proves the river still keeps its promises. A boy with more energy than common sense tries to balance a crumb on the back of his hand, and manages it, which counts as a record until anyone else tries. A soft breeze stumbles over the ramp, and then remembers something else it meant to do and leaves. By afternoon, you are nearly an expert in today. You guide the sledge to its position, check the grooves, lunge and lever, and celebrate internally when the block answers to the pry of your wooden bar. The fitter snaps his dyed cord across the face, a quick red whisper, and the copper chisel goes to work. Copper minds its manners with stone for only so long, so the tool bearer sits nearby with a brazier, feeding charcoal and coaxing edges back to usefulness. He explains to anyone who is not listening that a perfectly sharpened chisel is a promise you make to yourself. It turns out many promises in your life are triangular. The overseer has a whip, yes, but it is as much a noun as a verb. A punctuation mark at the edge of sentences you would rather not finish. The most common punishment is extra work, which is not creative but very effective. The most feared is being sent home early with pay docked, a paradox that stings worse than the lash, because it leaves you alone with your thoughts before the shadow has reached the proper notch. Truth be told, most discipline is in the scribe's hands anyway. Every hour finds its way onto an ostrakhan, a piece of broken pottery repurposed as a memory. Later, someone will count these shards as if counting seashells, and decide whether you moved enough stones to justify your daily jar. The math is not beautiful, but it is consistent, and consistency can feel like kindness when the horizon is a straight line. Work pauses for a brief prayer nearly as short as a breath. A tiny altar on the ridge collects offerings as small as they are sincere: a pinch of flour, a fig leaf, the talon of a bird found already dead. The words you speak have been spoken so often they have worn a groove in the air. Keep the rope from breaking, you murmur to Peta, who is fond of workmanship. Keep the dust out of my lungs, you ask Thoth, who keeps lists and might understand rations. And to whichever goddess is listening, keep my sandals from quitting. There is a little laugh at that, because even the devout have a sense of proportion. Once, someone asked that the stone not be offended by being moved, and everyone agreed that was thoughtful. When the sun thinks about lowering itself, the village thinks about you. The workers' quarter is a geometry of courtyards, narrow and practical, with walls that lean toward one another as if gossiping. You pass a communal oven. It smells like churned wheat. A small boy is chasing a goat that is not his, which is a violation of several unwritten rules and at least one written one. Your house is 2 rooms with a roof that sometimes behaves. The doorstick creaks in a language you understand. Inside, everything is in its place because there are not many places. Reed mats stack into a polite heap. A water jar cools by simply believing in shade. A clay lamp balances flame on a wick like a tightrope walker who never falls because no one looks up. In evening light, tools become social. You rub the mallet handle with a smear of oil, as if it were a living elbow. Someone next door mends a rope by making it longer, which is one of the hallmarks of civilization. Someone else argues quietly about whether sandstone is merely lazy limestone or something nobler. The debate has been going on long enough that no one expects a verdict. In the corner sits your amulet, a small faience heart that seems to have stored a drop of river inside. You tell it about your day because it is the one object that never shrugs. Dinner is practical. Bread again, of course, because bread is the currency of time. You break it into a bowl where yesterday's soup is practicing to be tomorrow's. A few onions charismatic enough to make you weep, even if you were not already inclined. An occasional date for sweetness and loyalty. The beer tonight is thinner to make it last water to the color of polite conversation. The jar is sealed with a plug of clay that remembers your thumbprint better than it remembers its own name. You consider, briefly, a second jar. You decide against it because tomorrow is scheduled to occur. The village has its own ladder of people. At the top are not kings, because kings do not live here, but scribes who carry authority in the thinness of their eyebrows. They can make a mark and subtract a half loaf with the same elegant wrist. Next come foremen, who always look as if they are about to start a sentence with, "in my experience," which is correct. Carpenters are respected because anything that can convince wood to be straight in this climate deserves respect. Stone cutters are admired at a safe distance, like beekeepers. At the bottom are you and your friends, which can sound discouraging if you think of it as a judgment rather than a location. It turns out being at the bottom is sometimes convenient. The top never knows where the sandals are kept. Priests drift through the quarter on festival days like purposeful clouds. They bless the ovens and the ramps and the jars and the names of people who do not have enough names. Their hands smell faintly of incense and more faintly of ink. The closer they are to the central temple, the more their sandals forgive them for walking this far. You have nothing against them. They keep the gods awake, which is considerate. They also keep lists, which is less helpful, but they do it beautifully. One of them once told a joke about a crocodile becoming a monk, and it was very funny because no one understood it. If you could see the city across the river, the houses, the courtyards, the gardens irrigated with patient devices, you would learn that many people, as lives are exactly like yours, but with more furniture. The difference between a potter and a pyramid builder is mostly the size of the objects that disobey them. Everyone chases the same shade, the same small breeze. You all eat what the river allows and sleep when the lamp says so. Even the wealthy make offerings to the same complicated gods. They simply have more pleasant baskets. Ritual is a tool, like a chisel. Before a dangerous lift, someone murmurs the names of deities who specialize in balance. The little shrine near the ramp receives a smear of beer, which it accepts with the grace of a patient stone. Amulets shaped like beetles appear on chests and wrists because the beetle knows how to push impossible things uphill without complaining aloud. The men who carry the ropes touch the amulets without looking. You have one too. It feels cool in your fingers before it warms to a temperature that might be called encouragement. Superstition is a very practical form of engineering. You step with your right foot first, not because it alters the world, but because it organizes your courage. You avoid certain words while a block is moving, not because stone understands language, but because silence lets everyone hear the same danger. A foreman has a favorite phrase, steady as a cart in deep ruts, which only works on the days when the ruts are deep. On other days, he says nothing and it works better. When accidents happen, they do not announce themselves in grand voices. They sound like rope giving up a secret, or like two stones deciding to be the same stone. You are taught to step backward before you look forward, which makes more sense than it sounds. The men who tend the injured know remedies invented by plants pretending to be generous. Mashed garlic to persuade a wound to stay clean. Honey to make everything feel a little less like time. The greatest medicine is rest, which is in short supply and therefore very valuable. The second greatest is a quiet voice that says the shadow has not reached the notch yet, so courage is still in season. You do not think much about death because there is little to think. It is a room with one door and no corners. People say what they have always said, that a heart must be lighter than a feather, which is why worries should be kept small and dense so they sink out of the way. In your village, burials for workers are simple and sincere. A linen wrapping that smells like barley, a few cheap but enthusiastic amulets, a jar that refuses to be empty in memory. Sometimes the name on a tag is spelled in a way that gently disagrees with the person it belongs to, and everyone chooses to pretend that names are like sandals. The important thing is that they remain attached. On rare evenings, there is a little festival, not the grand city kind with boats of gold leaf, but a compact version made of singing that fits in a courtyard. Someone wears a mask that has seen many faces and has learned to like them all. The drum is the same drum that keeps work from collapsing, now moonlighting as entertainment. It has exactly one beat and is very proud of it. Children chase sparks that try to climb into the night. The stars look down like supervisors who are also tired. As for the pyramid itself, it grows in such a slow, polite hurry that you sometimes forget it is happening. A block placed today will someday hold a block that holds a block. And at the very top, where wind decides to pirouette, nothing heavier than a single thought will rest. People will tell stories about secret chambers and curses because people enjoy decorations, even on facts. You know only that the ramp moves, the shadow slides, and the angle remains the angle, dependable as a friend who never remembers your birthday, but always carries water. Tomorrow begins when the frogs stop discussing the river and the lamp admits defeat. You will set your feet into yesterday's footprints and make them slightly deeper. You will taste the same bread and approve of it again. Someone will remark that the wind is from the north and therefore ambitious. Someone else will discover that a copper chisel chipped exactly where you would expect it to, and pretend to be surprised anyway. Small excellence will bloom in unnoticed places, a knot tied elegantly, a jar carried without sloshing, a stone face smoothed to a texture you could rest your cheek against if resting were in fashion. Before you sleep, you make a short list in your head. Replace the fiber on the second rope. Ask the tool bearer if he has any mallet handles that remember more polite hands. Bring a twig for the little shrine because it looked slightly undecorated today. Teach the boy with the goat how to count to 5 without telling the goat. Drink water slowly. Forget the argument about sandstone. Remember the notch on the wall. This list is not written anywhere and will be partially lost by morning, which is fine. The day prefers to teach in person, and then the sound of the village softens as if a great palm is pressing gently over all the roofs. The clay cools in the oven's mouth. The lamp lowers itself, dignified like a sledge at the end of a run. Your amulet sits in the corner and pretends not to glow. The pyramid waits the way lions wait in stories, which is to say, very still and secretly amused. You lie down on the same reed mat, under the same friendly air, and think a last small thought. The shadow will reach the notch again, and again, and again, until one day someone else watches it for you. It is a reassuring kind of eternity, measured in angles and bread, and the excellent idea of water poured over sand. The stone will slip obediently tomorrow, the rope will hum, the drum will do its one job, and you, pleasantly ordinary, will drift like a boat on very calm beer, while the largest plant in the world builds itself one patient breath at a time. You might not expect a quiet day to begin by sharpening a feather, but the monastery librarian likes to ease his mornings along the edge of a goose quill. The feather looks dramatic, yes, but the important part is the nib, which becomes a tiny chisel if you coax it with a penknife, and the sort of patience usually reserved for beans and prayer. The bell has only just sighed once, an obliging hint rather than a command, and the cold has not yet made up its mind. He trims, tests, trims again, and then nicks a narrow slit so ink can behave like a polite guest. Outside, someone moves hay. The sun is not yet ready for opinions. If you're still awake by the time we reach the third recipe for black ink, feel free to subscribe, though truly, it might be easier to close your eyes and let the goose feather do the convincing. The feather knows what it's doing. The librarian, who is also the keeper of keys, routines, and small secrets that smell faintly of vellum, begins with surfaces. Parchment is animal skin reinvented as memory, and it asks to be calmed before it will accept a word. He takes a cloth bag of chalky pounds, shakes a slow snowfall across the page, and rubs it in using a circle that would make geometry proud. The page grows less shiny, more willing, like a shy friend before tea. If today's choirs are calf, they are called vellum and make a more dignified sound when tapped with a fingernail. A sound halfway between a drum and a promise. Sheep parchment is slightly more conversational. Goats, he insists, are clever and need compliments. On a shelf labeled only in his head as the not yet, a pile of sheets leans hair side against hair side, flesh side against flesh side, so that every opening once bound will agree with itself. Books like to be symmetrical, so do people when given the choice. He rolls the lines next, because words without lines tend to drift exactly the way monks try not to. Against a board, he lays a folded thread stained with soot, pulls it back, and snaps it, leaving a shy gray lane. Then, with a lead plummet soft metal tied to string, he draws margins as if he were moving fences for very small, very polite sheep. He pricks guide holes along the foredge with a needle, not quite through, just enough to give the eye something tiny to trust. The page, now almost a field, waits with the patience of fields. Somewhere in the corner of the desk lies a bone folder, smooth as a river pebble, used to persuade paper and parchment to fold into agreeable arguments. It does this without ever raising its voice. Ink is a subject the librarian could discuss until the bell forgets to ring. Today's iron gall ink begins fortuitously with ignorance. Wasps lay eggs on oak leaves, the oak is offended, and grows a gall, a sort of botanical shrug. Dry that gall, crush it with intent, boil it with water, and add iron sulfate and a little gum arabic until the liquid thinks about being a thought. The mixture looks weak when first made and then darkens, a cautious dusk on the page. He tests viscosity with a ritual almost no one ever sees. A drop from the nib hangs, then hesitates, then falls. If it falls quickly, the ink is reckless. If slowly, it is sulking. He makes a note in a notebook of notes. A book that never leaves the desk and contains practical spells like add more gum, offer encouragement. For red, he keeps minium, which is cheerful but pushy. For blue ground azurite, its dignity compromised only by its expense. For gold, a leaf so thin it is basically an opinion. On the shelf is a jar of lampblack soot, a comfort in case all else fails. The lamps have been generous. He begins copying the way bees begin, as if there was never anything else to do. The text is Gregory this season. Last season it was Augustine. Before that, a local sermon collection and a hand that apologized for itself. The hand he uses is textura, upright and even, a field of small fences. He moves left to right, up to down, a steady, well-prepared winter. Every 10 or 12 words, he pauses and reads backward, because mistakes prefer to be discovered in reverse. He does not like to erase. Scraping a letter off parchment feels like unbaking bread. When he must, he lifts the letter with a sharp knife, breathes on the scar, and smooths it with the bone folder until even the page forgives him. Sometimes when the day grows too straight, he indulges in the slightly indulgent longs, a letter that looks like a person thinking. It is his private rebellion, approved by tradition. The scriptorium air is an ecosystem of small noises. Quails whisper on skin. A cat pats across a bench and declines to apologize. Yes, there is a cat. There's nearly always a cat because mice consider shelves to be theaters, and the cat is the usher. Once in a decade, a paw print becomes part of a page, and future librarians will pretend to be annoyed while secretly framing the incident with their eyes. A brother at the next desk coughs with the regularity of a metronome, a helpful service for those who like their time kept in bronchial measures. The librarian's stool creaks with opinions inherited from the tree it once was. Outside, the cloister fountain practices being a sentence that never ends. Mid-morning, he rubrics a chapter, which is to say, he writes the important beginnings in red. The word rubric simply means read, which is the kind of etymology that feels like resting. He shapes the initial P for per with a nib he sharpened to behave like a tiny axe, then fills its belly with a vine that remembers summer. He lays a thin cushion of gesso where gold will pretend to be sunlight, and breathes lightly until the surface becomes just tacky enough to accept a leaf of gold that weighs almost nothing and nevertheless expects flattery. The leaf falls, pretends to resist, and then becomes obediently radiant when he polishes it with a dog-tooth burnisher, which is not metaphorical. It takes longer to describe than to do, which is a fair description of almost all library work. Visitors come not from outside the monastery typically, but from other rooms. A brother from the infirmary asks in a whisper pitched at the volume of clean linen whether the herbal compendium can be chained closer to the warm wall, as the chill makes leaves curl as if they were trying to remember being skin. The librarian, keeper of chains and persuasion, agrees to move the hook but not the book, because the chain is measured to reach a specific lectern like a dog measured to reach a specific doorknob. Chains in this library are not metaphors for control. They are metaphors for unwilling feet. A book that is consulted daily does not wish to visit the fields. It wishes to remain open in a pool of afternoon and be looked at kindly. He writes a curse in a new volume with a perfectly calm hand, because experience suggests that a polite thread travels farther than a harsh one. Whosoever steals this book, may he be briefly confused and find only blank pages where he once found sense. He writes, choosing humor over lightning. These little curses are not anger. They are like signs that say, please return cups to the refectory. Books take years. A single codex may be 200 skins, and everyone notices when 200 of anything go missing. He adds a shelf mark at the bottom of the spine. Armorium B, Bay 3, second from the top, 2 books from the right. The mark reads like a treasure map designed by a person who prefers not to travel. After dinner, the monastic sort, which is generous with silence and respectable with pulses, he turns to binding repairs. Binding is the tender carpentry of words. He checks chords made from hemp and flax, taps the spine and band, and listens for a tone that means honest tension. If a hinge has begun to sulk, he mends it with leather pulled from a box of scraps that smells like the patient part of a tannery. He uses a sewing frame whose wooden uprights have names only he remembers. Glue today is a mixture of hide and intention, warmed until it tries to say yes. He pastes down the paste down with a brush that once flirted with paint and now lives responsibly. At a small table near the window, there is a notebook of borrowings, carefully ruled, that serves as the monastery's most quietly dramatic text. A name, a title, a day. There are no due dates, only a column called returned, which contains in several hands the word Deo Gratias. The librarian believes this is not technically necessary, but he likes to see thanks in the ledger. He keeps a separate list of books that are out but not gone, a category he invented both for logic and for comfort. When he runs a fingertip down the spines, he can feel the absence like a space in his own teeth. Mid-afternoon belongs to indexing. He has not invented the index, no one person does, but he has perfected a method that makes him happy. He writes a table at the front of certain volumes, a calm net of topics and folio numbers that spares future readers the pleasure of getting lost. He trims little parchment flags, glues them at the foredge, and draws on them tiny symbols, an herb, a fish, a hand for the illiterate or the hurried. He thinks of these as trail markers, a courtesy to minds that wander. When he is feeling indulgent, he draws a pointing hand, the manicule, which resembles a small, surprised person who cannot believe how helpful it is being. The librarian's lifetime is measured in candles. The scriptorium has a holder that keeps the flame level, and he trims the wick with a tool built for wick trimming, a luxury of specialization. Tallow smokes, beeswax behaves. Oil says, perhaps, and then tries to spill. He places a parchment guard between flame and margin, even though he has only ever singed a book once, and that copy of Jerome had already survived a more serious indignity involving a kettle. The memory persists because parchment remembers heat the way people remember birthdays, with a fond wince. Weather is a collaborator. On damp days, parchment swells and begins to curl like a cautious fern. On dry days, it lies flat and agrees to be ruled. The librarian owns a small bag of weights stitched from linen and filled with sand that came from nowhere in particular. He sets them along the foredge to remind the page of its responsibilities. If a sheet refuses to be persuaded, he rests it near the hearth and talks to it as if it were a skittish foal. "We are only asking for lines," he tells it. "We are only asking for a little patience." The sheet often complies out of embarrassment. For variety, he catalogues oddities, a scrap with a prayer written around the edges like a frame, a tiny book designed to be worn on a belt and consulted when the belt is unconsulted, a palimpsest where older words sleep under newer ones like a previous conversation under a carpet. When he is feeling scholastic, he copies a marginal complaint from a scribe long dead. "It is very cold. My fingers are numb. I have written this only to warm them." He copies it not for meaning, but for texture, as if to shake hands with a cousin through time. Then he adds in his own small hand, "It is not so cold here, but the bench argues." Late afternoon, a messenger arrives with a bundle from another house. Quires sewn with thread the wrong color, a dedication to a bishop who changed his mind, a request for a better green. The librarian has thoughts about green. Verdigris, made from copper's dislike of vinegar, will bite the page if left unsupervised. He prefers malachite when the budget cooperates, which is not often. He writes back in a measured tone that suggests both sympathy and aloofness, the official voice of a man defending a page from chemistry. Before vespers, he takes the long key to the armorium, the book cupboard, and breathes in the peculiar fragrance of accumulated certainty. Skin, dust, faint sweetness of past candles, the quiet aftertaste of old arguments. Books are stored upright because slumping begins with indulgence. The chain reeds, which live on slanted shelves, hang contentedly, their iron links warmed by years of hands. He tucks cedar chips into corners to convince bookworms that their meals are not here. The worms do not read, but they do edit, and not in ways critics respect. Evenings invite odd correspondences. A lay brother, who minds the granary, insists on trading riddles for shelf time. What has a mouth and does not eat? The brother asks. A jar, the librarian replies, and earns an hour with the lives of the desert fathers, which read like weather reports from a different kind of climate. A traveler brings news of a university town where students rent lectures as if knowledge were a seat. The librarian tries to imagine a world in which books are multiplied like crops and laughs quietly the way monks laugh, which is mostly with the eyes. Sometimes he copies music. Notes rise and fall on red lines, a little staircase for sound. He knows only 2 modes by heart, but his hand knows them both very well. When he writes a noon, he thinks of a bird that knows the height of noon. Frequency becomes geometry. People believe music is an art. He suspects it is a way to keep air organized. A storm begins outside, polite at first, then confident. Rain threads itself through the garden and drums on the cloister roof with impeccable meter. He sets aside the choir he had meant to finish because pages swell like opinions in damp weather, and instead opens a book he bound long ago, one that always opens as if pleased. It is a bestiary. A donkey considers theology by looking surprised. A pelican pierces its breast to feed its young, which is not what pelicans do, but is what pelicans do in books. In the margin, a tiny knight fights a snail. The librarian smiles at the snail, which never loses. The snail knows how to be inevitable without being urgent. Toward Compline, the lights soften and the pages take on the color of memory. He enters the day's small accomplishments in the register. 3 pages of Gregory, 1 initial, 2 repairs, a shelf moved 1 finger width to indulge a tall book with a proud spine. He adds a note about the ink, behaved admirably. Perhaps overconfident, he notes that the cat sat exactly where it should not, and was forgiven exactly as much as it should be. He closes the register with a sound that feels like a period in wood. The librarian's night is an unspooling of small closures. He caps the ink with a scrap of parchment that bears, on its underside, a list of porridge ingredients from some other year. He rinses nibs in a jar where the water is black with potential sentences. He places the penknife in its slot because a careless penknife teaches humility more quickly than theology. He sets the weights in their bag, as if tucking in punctual children. He blows out the lamp and watches the wick glow like a tiny monk imagining sunrise. Walking back to his cell, he thinks about how slowly books move and how very fast thought goes once it finds a margin. He considers the possibility that memory is actually a kind of binding thread drawn through holes, snug but not strangling. He thinks of the beginning of today's chapter, how the red letter glowed as if breathing, and how the black words lay down in rows like vines trained over a trellis, ready to fruit whenever anyone looked. He remembers a moment years ago when a passerby placed a hand on a page, tenderly as if resting on a shoulder. It is a very small memory and adequately sized. If you are still awake, you might like to know that some libraries hang a bell near the cupboard, not to summon readers, but to remind them it is possible to leave. The bell rarely rings. The librarian suspects this is because reading is a kind of weather. It settles over you quietly and persuades your plans to stay indoors. He lets himself imagine a future, a street where books will sit in windows like cats, and people will carry them in sacks as if knowledge were groceries. Then he imagines his desk in that same future, still smelling of chalk and gum, still ready to listen to a feather, and he feels strangely rested. At last he reaches his bed, which is a modest plank with ambitions of being a cloud. The wind is a commentary he does not need to answer. He turns his thoughts the way he turns a page, from right to left, from known to next. Somewhere a jar cools. Somewhere a margin waits for a small drawing that will make someone a little happier than reading strictly requires. He decides to place a tiny pointing hand beside tomorrow's best sentence, and a snail, of course, because the snail is a friend of patience. The room takes a long, slow breath. Ink dries by faith more than chemistry. The quills relax and think about geese. The day folds itself into the ledger under done, which is not final, only tidy. And while rain finds its way into honest puddles in the cloister, the librarian drifts index after index, shelf after shelf through a sleep as orderly as a well-ruled page, where every line knows where to be and none of them are in any hurry to end. You might not expect your day to be measured by the size of your shadow on a pit wall, but that is how a sensible worker in the king's quarry knows it is time to begin. When the shadow is as long as a good rope, you stretch your back and tie your sandals. When it shortens to the length of a cubit rod, you have already produced a respectable amount of dust. This is not a dramatic way to mark time. It is the quiet mathematics of light, stone, and patience. If you are still awake by the time we talk about the fourth reason everyone drinks beer at breakfast, you may subscribe or make a small mental note on an imaginary ostrakhan. Either is fine. Either can be forgotten gently. Before the sun finishes the polite part of rising, you step into air that tastes faintly of silt and ashes from last night's cook fires. The village is rows of mud brick rooms that share walls like cousins sharing stories. The floor is hard-packed and sprinkled with crushed gypsum so it doesn't cling to bare feet like an overenthusiastic cat. Someone's wife swats grain in a wooden mortar that has learned the rhythm of the neighborhood. Thud, lift, breathe, thud. Someone's child is chasing a scarab with the solemnity usually reserved for priests. Your tools are where you left them because tools, like neighbors, appreciate predictability. The copper chisel waits in its leather wrap, a strip of goat that remembers being a goat only when it rains. Breakfast is bread, which you address with the seriousness bread deserves. The loaves are small, sometimes dome-shaped, sometimes the shape of an upside-down beehive, all of them stamped with marks to prove the ration is official. The grain is emmer, which contains ambition, bran, and occasional surprise gravel. You soften it with beer that is not a drink so much as a chewable idea, thick and politely sour, brewed from malted barley and fragments of bread that look like islands on a small foamy map. A jug collar of twisted fiber keeps the clay stopper honest. It is acceptable to eat your portion while walking to work, because a morning is nothing more than a queue of tasks, and bread still tastes like bread when it jostles. You wipe your hands on your kilt and try not to think about how many kilts you've wiped bread on. The foreman carries a tally board that remembers more than he does. On it, your Gangus name is written in careful ink teams like to be called things such as the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of the North Wind. Names that begin as a joke and then become respectable. The board lists who hauled how many loads yesterday, who took the extra turn at the well, who found a chisel edge when everyone else found only excuses. You accept a fresh cord of plaited palm fiber that will be a rope today and a measure of distance tomorrow. You consider briefly the small romance of standardized units. A royal cubit rod is 52 fingers long, which is either an elegant system or a polite invitation to keep counting. By mid-morning, you are acquainting yourself with limestone that never asked to meet you. The quarry face is a conversation you have learned to start well. Wooden wedges drive into shallow cuts, and when wetted they expand like bragging. A controlled crack answers back with a satisfied sound, a low note you feel in the ribs. To trim a block, your copper chisel taps with a rhythm so steady birds consider nesting on your shoulder. Every few dozen strikes, you walk to the brazier where a patient man tends strips of glowing metal and the water jar that has always been surprised by the hiss. Anneal, quench, tap, repeat. It is the lullaby of copper. For granite, when granite appears in your life, you abandon copper and choose a dolerite hammerstone the size of a melon. The hammer is not subtle, it is honest. It turns ambition into pebbles and pebbles into dust, and never apologizes once. Noon has many definitions. Today it is when the work captain calls for water on the sledge track. A boy with a jar walks ahead of the wooden runners, splashing a modest ribbon so the sand packs and the friction sulks. You have seen the painted scene of this on a tomb wall, a statue on a sled, a man with a jar, and you have felt, not for the first time, that art sometimes stands politely behind logistics and takes notes. 16 men on a rope can pull more convincingly than 12. 32 can pull and sing. The song is practical poetry. It is mostly about pulling, and sometimes about men you know, and occasionally about bread you wish were bigger. The sled speaks in a low groan that even the dead would recognize. Some afternoons belong to ramps. There are ramps that rise straight as an argument, and ramps that wrap around like a very long nap. You do not pretend to know which is better. You only know your job is the part where you place a log roller exactly when and where it is wanted, and then get your foot out of the way like a person who has developed a philosophy about toes. The slope is dusted with gypsum chips that sparkle like they are trying to be encouraging. A man with a banner stands at the turning platform and signals with the cool assurance of someone whose arms will not ache tomorrow. You notice a neat stack of chips placed at the ramp's edge for the purpose of looking neat. This is what civilization does when no one is watching. On quieter days, a large block arrives that needs a conversation with geometry. Plumb bobs dangle, because gravity writes as clean a line as any scribe. Measuring chords sing their little songs in the wind. A mason with a cord soaked in red ochre snaps it against a block and leaves a line so fine an ant could use it as a road. You shave the face to the line until the block sighs with satisfaction. The supervisor pays you a compliment in the language of numbers, 4 fingers of error on 30 cubits of run. It is praise that would not impress a poet, but it would move a stone. When the foreman's tally board looks too much like a ledger and not enough like a day, voices grow shorter and whips appear, the way thunderstorms appear when the air discovers it has opinions. The lash is mostly theater, but not always. Overseers prefer to hit lightly and pound loudly. The sting is real. The publicness is punishment. The board that records loaves given also records lashes dealt, a system that makes the book honest and sometimes the book heavy. You choose to be early tomorrow. The whip is a thin argument you'd rather not have again. Back at the village, evening is an archaeology of small routines. You wash dust from your ankles with water that feels richer than money. You rub a little natron on your hands to convince grit to let go. The smell is desert clean, like stone that has just remembered it was lake bed once. Your room is a box with 2 shadows. One belongs to the lamp, the other to the sleeping mat woven from palm ribs that squeak like friendly mice. The family's storage jar holds onions, which have never pretended to be glamorous, and a few dates, which always do. A clay ball of leftover dough sits near the hearth, ready to be tomorrow a starter because tomorrow will forget how to be bread unless you remind it. Supper is a festival of the familiar. There's more beer, because the river is safer than wells and grain understands how to become comfort. You tear bread into the stew and call it generous. The stew contains lentils today, or perhaps chickpeas, and the sort of herbs that grow in the arguing space between walls. Salt arrives as a pinch from a friend who knows how to be kind in public. Someone tells the story about the 4 men who tripped into a plaster vat and emerged looking like a luminous ghost. The story does not age. It powdered the day with laughter 10 years ago and will again 10 years from now, which is the best kind of powder. Night is a market for small repairs. A sandal string meets a new knot. A rope end is retwisted with the wisdom of the old end, which includes twist the other way first. You sharpen the copper again because sharpness is the kind of hope you can hold. The room is a workshop of murmurs. A reed basket gets another loop around its rim, and a child in the doorway learns that circles are more honest than triangles when you need to carry onions. Your neighbor hums a melody learned from a boatman, which is to say, a melody about water and repetition. The lamp flame is a tiny sun that accepts your devotion oil. Sleep is technically next, but there is a detour called prayer. You press a thumb against a small faience amulet, a wedged eye, glossy and convinced of itself, and ask for protection from the problems that prefer the dark. You say the names that have looked after you before: Ptah, who knows hands; Sekhmet, who knows fevers; Hathor, who knows the difference between noise and joy. The wall niche holds a bread offering that is mostly symbolic, and then, because not all symbols have to be perfect, becomes breakfast the next day. You draw a line in your head between the place you work and the place you will never see, the burial chamber. You stay on the first side of the line. The other side is for priests, and possibly for the sort of quiet no one returns from with news. In the mid-month, ration scribes arrive like a weather front. They wear kit that sparkles with the tiny luxury of clean linen, and they bring lists that make people straighten. Loaves are counted, jars are counted. Working names are read out with a serious merriment, usually reserved for festivals. You sign with your voice because signatures have not been invented yet, and also because your voice has done well by you so far. The scribe uses a reed pen trimmed like a small spear. The ink is a marriage of soot and water and gum, and it behaves itself. You watch the black line dry. You watch the clay seal on the storeroom door take an impression from a wooden cylinder, which spins pictures of gods and fish around the small moment and makes it official. Bureaucracy is a kind of spell. People stand back politely while it works. Sometimes you go to the doctor, who is also a barber and a part-time philosopher. He has a jar of honey which he applies to everything that does not move, and natron for everything that does. For a cut, he adds melted fat and a prayer, and then a bandage that looks suspiciously like a piece torn from a once respectable kilt. He tells you not to anger Sekhmet and not to walk around scorpions as if they were furniture. You say yes to both. He trims your hair to the cheerful length of practical and shaves your beard with a blade that remembers being sharp. You leave lighter in ways that are visible and ways that aren't. Festivals arrive like a raft does, slowly across the water and then suddenly at your feet. You follow the musicians because it is always wise to follow the people who have drums. A procession passes with a portable shrine, its poles polished with the handprints of generations. The god is carried the way good pottery is carried, with pride and a little fear. You clap in time because you can. Someone hands you a cup of beer that is legally encouraged, and you find yourself more pious by the swallow. The day lifts. For a few hours, you are not building for a king. You are building for this. The lamplight at night will remember you smiling. On other days, there is the patient engineering of canals and causeways. Water is a tool you do not lift. When the inundation pulls back, it leaves behind mud that pretends to be soft forever. You walk across it and sink politely. Men with baskets clean the channel until it remembers being a channel. The causeway is a road with ambitions. On it, sledges glide between river and sight, and you, who have pulled enough for all of them, take a moment to admire the tidiness of the distance. There is a white stone facing awaiting the pyramid that will make the sun blink. For now, you blink instead. Dust does that to a person. A rumor arrives the way rumors do on the back of a man with a cousin in the royal workshops. The rumor says the king's architects are testing a new angle, a whisper of mathematics that will make the sides meet more satisfyingly at heaven. You consider angles like a person considers cloud shapes. They exist. They change nothing about how a rope feels in the hand. You nod as if geometry were gossip. You count to the next rest under your breath. The number is the number it always is. Your body files its own paperwork. Shoulders apply for holidays and are refused. Hands write complaints on papyrus that is your skin and are answered with ointment and a short nap against a friendly wall. Your feet, which have no legal counsel, accept the terms without enthusiasm. You have learned the small science of self-maintenance. Soak the egg, stretch the calf, keep a pebble from becoming a legend by removing it early. The foreman keeps a bucket for pebbles. He insists there's a story in every one. He is not wrong, but today you are not the audience. At sunset, the site becomes a city of long shadows. Blocks that looked like stubborn facts an hour ago begin to look like opinions. The ramp is a river that has forgotten water but remembers flow. You walk down with the day. An ibis stalks nonsense in the drainage ditch with the focus of a scribe. The air cools enough to make you believe a night exists. You pass the smell of a kill. You pass laughter. You pass a man talking to a brick as if it had apologized poorly. Your room is exactly where you left it, which is the most satisfying kind of miracle. Some nights you dream of the burial you will not get. The rich go into stone with painted lists of bread they will never finish, jugs that never pour out. You will go into sand, probably with a charm and a good name. It is enough. A potter told you once that the best amphora he ever fired cracked in the kiln and became the most useful jar in his yard. You like that? You keep it the way a man keeps a small smooth stone in a pocket for thinking. When the priest in the village speaks of the ba and the ta, the parts of a person that travel and the parts that stay, you nod because you have watched loaf after loaf become energy. Transformation is not a foreign word. You perform it with ropes. At the end of a month, a sledge breaks in a way that is not dramatic but is thorough. You and two others take it to the carpenter, whose yard smells like cleverness. He squints, pulls a peg, and explains without condescension that wood has wishes, and you cannot order a plank to forget where it once grew. He planes a curve until it agrees to be a straight line in public. He adds a dowel the way a scribe adds a margin, as insurance against a good idea later. You carry the sledge back with a feeling that you have participated in a ceremony. It is a small one, yes. The best ones are. There are days, more than anyone admits, when the wind at the top of the ramp tastes like the desert has decided to bake you into a loaf. You tuck your headcloth tighter, let the cloth soak the sweat, and think about the shadow at dawn, how long and kind it was. You promise your future self an onion. Future you believes you, a reliable coworker is a gift. Being your own reliable coworker is a cleverness you learned only last year. And there is the very human business of small grievances that turn into small jokes and then into friendships that endure like a good wall. The man who always measures twice now measures thrice and turns it into a performance, complete with a bow to the plumbob. The woman who bakes the ration loaves names them absurdly as she pulls them from the oven. Here is the vizier of breakfast. Here is the high priest of crumbs. And you laugh into your sleeve because laughter is allowed to be a private luxury. A foreman develops a superstition that the best days begin when a hoopoo lands on the ramp. You begin almost to see them. If you are still listening, you have noticed there is no finale. There is the neatness of the day becoming evening, the way a line becomes a margin. You wash your hands in a basin where the water has a small moon floating in it. You put your tools to bed with a care that looks like tenderness and is, in fact, practicality. You touch the amulet again because habit is the best kind of faith. Someone laying coughs and then remembers to stop. Someone sings only the chorus of a work song because sometimes a chorus is enough. The lamp makes a little circle and you lie down inside it. Tomorrow the shadow will be long again and kind. The rope will burn the same polite line across your palm. The stone will give its low answers. The bread will be bread, perfect in its ability to finish a hunger. In a far chamber that does not exist yet, A ceiling waits for stars that will be painted by someone who has never hauled a block, and yet, in his own way, is also hauling. The pyramid will go on not being finished for years, which is its way of teaching patience. You blink once, twice. The mat accepts your shape. The air cools 1 more degree. You let the day close like a lid sliding onto a clay jar, soft, accurate, nearly silent, and you drift into the easy anonymity at the workers' village, where sleep is the only festival that comes every night, and everyone is invited. And no one needs to bring a lamp because the moon has agreed to do the counting. You might not expect your day to be timed by the sound of mortar pestles waking up, but that is how a worker in the king's service knows dawn is almost behaving like dawn. The village hums a little before the sun does, as if everyone is politely pretending to be awake. A rooster misreads the sky and volunteers too early. A child chases a scarab with intense professionalism. A neighbor clears his throat like an official announcement. If you're still awake by the time we reach the correct number of knots in a ration rope, feel free to subscribe or just let the idea drift past like smoke from a cooking pot. Either choice will be accepted by the gods of small decisions. You slide your feet into sandals that remember yesterday, run a palm over the kilt that keeps dust tasteful, and step into air that smells of ash, bread, and the kind of damp that only a clay jar understands. The mat has left its tidy pattern on your back, like a stamp the night applied to prove you slept. You pinch a bit of coal to line your eyelids, not vanity, just practical shade. The sun respects eyeliner more than it respects most promises. Someone's wife thumps grain with the calm power of habit. The pestle lifts, falls, until the whole lane agrees that time has started. A breeze from the river delivers the friendly, swampy breath of Nile water and geese that are certain they own mornings. Breakfast is bread that seems both eternal and slightly crunchy with geological sincerity. Emmer wheat has an arrangement with millstones, and a few specks of grit always pass inspection. The dentists of the afterlife will have work. You soften the loaf with beer that is less a beverage and more a pleasant porridge, slightly sour, thick enough to hold an opinion. The brewer fermented yesterday's bread to become today's drink, a kind of domestic reincarnation that keeps the household optimistic. The jug wears a braided collar because even clay appreciates accessories. A bite of onion turns the world sharper. A date reassures it again. And now the body is ready to do what bodies do when stone needs to move. The foreman strolls with his tally board the way a cat strolls with its tail, confident that every surface is improved by contact. Your gang is recorded in ink that dries with priestly dignity. Work teams have names the way ships have names, useful for shouting and for pride. The strong arms of the north file past the friends of Pata, and a scribe taps his reed on his lip as if numbers are a flavor. Your rope coil lands on your shoulder, a polite heaviness, and you feel a familiar optimism about knots. A good knot undoes when it should and refuses when it must. This is also the definition of a trustworthy friend. The path to the quarry crunches under sandals like a chorus of small bones. Copper chisels glint in their leather rolls, already resigned to being struck, heated, and struck again. Copper gets tired the way people do. You anneal it patiently over coals, and it remembers its purpose. Dollarite pounders river smoothed, heavy and unphilosophical wait for hard jobs. A boy sings to himself about fish. A man pretends not to be stretching, then definitely stretches. The sun tries to climb out of the desert, and you try not to notice, which is a fair trade. At the quarry face, the bedrock has the calm expression of someone who has seen this all before. Wooden wedges tap into shallow slots and are given water to drink, swelling with a pride that becomes pressure, that becomes a crack you can feel in your teeth. The first block sighs away from its neighbors like a polite guest excusing itself. You and two friends trim the rough sides with that rhythm of tap, turn, wipe, tap again. Every so often you swear the block answers back in a low musical note more bass drum than melody. A scribe might argue the sound is imaginary. The men who carry stone are happy not to argue. When the sledges arrive, they are familiar strangers, planks, runners, pegs, a vocabulary that is older than anyone's grandfather. The lubrication crew steps forward with a large jar and a small grin. They pour water ahead of the runners, so the sand compacts and the wood glides. Someone tested this years ago and never let the secret become boring. A painting in a tomb shows a man doing exactly this, which means technically you're participating in art history. 32 men haul, voices braided into a work song that is mostly about pulling and a little about bread. The song does not need new verses. It needs breath, and you have brought some. Ramps remind you that geometry can be experienced with calves. Some ramps go straight like an ambitious thought. Others wrap around like a patient one. You do not choose. You lean back into the rope and follow instructions from the man with the flag who has discovered the joy of gestures. Plumb bobs dangle like small, decisive stars. A mason chalks a red ochre line so crisp an ant could use it as a road. Your job is to place the roller at the moment when the world thinks it's clever, to keep fingers where fingers belong, to wedge the block with stone flakes that were nobody yesterday and useful today. There is also the matter of supervision. Overseers possess sticks shaped like authority. Mostly they use voices. Sometimes they demonstrate the stick's explanatory power. A tally board lists rations distributed, loads moved, and lashes given, which is not an especially charming column but keeps the book honest. Punishment is often symbolic, and sometimes it is not. You work in a way that lets symbolism stay symbolic. The phrase fear of failure is too dramatic. Call it respect for consequences and carry on. When the sun decides the day is a clay bowl and a kill, and you are the vessel, there is a rest under a strip of shade that exists largely because a foreman believes in it. The water jar sweats like a hard-working animal. You learn again the ancient technique of drinking without finishing. Bread tastes better when eaten beside someone who also looks dusty. Your friend claims his chisel edge lasts longer if he says a line from a hymn to pad out over it before quenching. You try it because skepticism is no reason to avoid better metal. Afternoons belong to fitting. Blocks that were born large are introduced to their neighbors by careful shaving, like arranging a polite marriage. A measuring cord purrs when snapped against stone. The small chips pile into drifts that glitter faintly where gypsum dust has wandered through. Someone smooths a face with sandstone until it feels like memory. In the distance, the river flashes fish silver, reminding the desert that water is a thing that happens. Evening strolls back like a scribe who forgot his pen and has returned for it. You carry tools to the brazier for the night's annealing, greet the man who tends fire as if he were a cousin, and walk toward the village with the day leaning against your shoulder. The street has already staged its little market of greetings. A potter fans his kill door with a shard that used to be an amphora and is now a breeze. Children arrange pebbles into a game whose rules are obvious to everyone except you. You judge accurately and do not ask questions. Home is a tidy single-room box with ambitions. The roof holds jars, the niche holds a small household god, the floor holds everything else. On good days you have garlic. On better days, a fish. On excellent days, the fish arrived without stories about how far it traveled on a donkey. Dinner is stew politely thickened by yesterday's bread, flavored with something green from the wall's damp corner that insists it is a herb. The lamp burns castor oil and a willingness to forgive smoke. You rinse your hands with water brightened by a pinch of matron, the universal answer. The gravy clean feels like reasoning. The workers' village has a social life shaped like baskets stacked inside other baskets. Privacy is a rare delicacy. Walls are thin and conversation travels. You learn to enjoy the company of other people's stories, the way you enjoy the smell of other people's bread present, comforting, almost yours. Lanes are a jumble of jars and cats and borrowed stools. A neighbor has developed a theory linking the phases of the moon to the stubbornness of copper. He lectures you nod, the moon stays unmoved. Someone's aunt makes beer strong enough to encourage opinions very quickly. She sells it in cups that are suspiciously large. Straight to happen quietly. Foremen live 2 doorways from you, but their walls are slightly wider, their water jars slightly taller, their voices slightly more certain at meetings. Scribes carry authority the way a kite carries the wind lightly but decisively. You admire their ink, which is black like a good idea and red like the national color of corrections. Priests pass sometimes, smelling of incense that pretends to be clouds. They are friendly, but friendship with a priest mostly means you stop walking when they want to walk and say, "May you live," more often than usual. As for the pharaoh, he is present mostly as a name in a cartouche, like a stamp on the day. You are at the bottom of this layered cake, close to the ground where flour is, which is a fine place if you like bread. There is a small bureaucracy housed inside your stomach. Bread rations are measured in loaves with stamped seals, a tiny rectangle that would impress a modern notary. Beer comes in jars counted carefully. A broken jar gets its own paperwork. Oils and onions appear according to lists that live in the foreman's head, and occasionally in a basket with papyrus labels. On festival days, the numbers become generous. On ordinary days, the numbers teach reliability. A man once tried to trade his loaf for a very handsome goat bell. The scribe admired his aesthetic sense and declined his economic theory. Why are you always at the bottom? Because pyramids are excellent visual metaphors, and because the bottom is where stability lives. You joke that if the pharaoh really wanted to honor workers, he would build an upside-down monument and have the king balance carefully at the point while you all relaxed underneath. Everyone laughs, because it is safely absurd. The truth tastes less clever and more ordinary. Stone must begin somewhere, and it begins with people whose names will not be written on gold, but will be carried in muscles for a while and in dust much longer. The village knows its doctors. One is a barber who understands both hair and honey. He shaves with a blade that is sharp for 9 perfect seconds and tolerable for the next 20. He recommends honey on everything that bleeds and natron on everything that doesn't. Another is a wise woman with a bowl for herbs, a spoon for gossip, and a quiet prayer for each poultice. She teaches you to tie a strip of linen around the wrist, not too tight, and to tell the patient a joke exactly when they expect a complaint. Laughter is antiseptic, at least to the people who want to believe it. When the workday has been peeled and stacked, worship peeks in politely. The little shrine in your wall niche holds a faience amulet the color of cool water. You rub it with your thumb, the way you always do, not because you think the god forgets you, but because you like the feeling of asking. At the larger shrine near the ramp, a priest chants in a tone that sounds like a long hallway. He sprinkles water, which makes the ramp glitter as if pleased. You mutter the short version of the prayer. No one is counting syllables, and smell the incense, which smells like something important that is not your responsibility. You leave a small loaf that is genuinely meant as an offering, and will tomorrow become someone's breakfast without embarrassment. Some days the desert is decisive and slips its foot under someone else's. A sled shifts, a heel skids, a shoulder forgets how much it holds. The team stops and starts again with quieter jokes. Accidents prefer drama. You teach them boredom. If a man goes home early, his rope position closes behind him the way water closes behind a fish. Nothing is stuck. Tomorrow brings a new line to pull. When a block chips off in an unexpected corner, the mason's face experiences all 5 stages of philosophy in 12 seconds. He then reaches for the sandstone and begins again at the most peaceful stage, improving. Exhaustion is an animal you learn to lead with a rope around its soft nose. You feed it small rests, water, a thought about the coolness under a fig tree, a promise of the onion waiting at home. You do not try to wrestle it. You tie your headcloth tighter so sweat behaves. You pace so your breath doesn't develop interesting opinions. By remembrance, by song, by the small mathematics of steps, you shepherd your tiredness through the afternoon without letting it wander into trouble. No one speaks much about burial. It is not morbid. It is simply a chore scheduled for later, like sharpening a chisel you are not using today. The important people will go into the mountain wrapped in moonless of riches. You plan to go into sand with a good name and perhaps a charm that was old when you were young. You have seen clay cones stamped with names and pushed into mud brick walls so a person can be remembered, even if the wall lives a different life later. The idea is both practical and kind. When someone in the lane dies, the village makes more bread than usual and more silence. The quiet is not sad, exactly. It is respectful to the size of what happened. Meanwhile, the project looks, in the warm light of late afternoon, like a theory of neatness. A face of white limestone is set with such patience that even the sun peers in to approve the line. The angle pleases men who like angles. A tiny lump of gypsum on a ramp edge catches the light and pretends to be treasure. The view from halfway up shows the river pretending to be a blue ribbon tied around the earth. You massage your shoulder where the rope rides and feel a pebble under the skin that has applied for a permanent status. You deny the application with a gentle rub. The work song has developed a funny extra verse about a man who miscounted cubits and politely built a short wall that now serves as a bench admired by visitors. This is educational comedy. A scribe added a pun that makes people groan each time and then teach it to the apprentices, which is how culture continues. A boy on the lubrication crew has started watering the path with theatrical flourishes. If he were a bird, he would be a heron. He wears a reed ring on one finger and insists it's lucky. The overseer tolerates this because morale is a tool you cannot anneal at night. When moonlight gets the first word and the lamp flame gets the last, you sit on the threshold for a while and watch the lane become a gentle river of talk. Someone calculates, inaccurately but with conviction, how many blocks are left. Someone else describes a dream in which a huge stone politely rolled out of the way to let him pass. You pick a splinter from your palm and consider saving it as a memory, then let it go. The amulet on the wall feels cool against your fingertip. You tell it thank you, which costs a nothing and tends to help anyway. Tomorrow there will be more stone, more bread, more respectful arguments with gravity. There will be the pleasant ache of a rope across your palm where yesterday's callus wrote a letter to today. There will be the tiny victory of a straight line that stays straight, the shared comedy of a loaf that looks like a dignitary, the secret satisfaction of rinsing dust from your ankles in water that glows a little with the moon. There will also be a moment when you look up and the sky is the exact color of the stone facing, and for a heartbeat, the world is one material. You let that pass without deciding anything about it. And as you lie down, the mat greeting your back with its orderly optimism, you think in the unhurried way tired people think. Your name will be carried by voices for a while, by dust much longer, and by nothing eventually, which is fine. The pyramid will be finished by hands that look like yours and not yours. The pharaoh will be a story, then a sign, then a puzzle for children. But a plank you plane today will be part of a sludge that slides tomorrow in a way that is perfectly smooth, and that is small and complete. The lamp goes thin, the lane quiets, the kill sighs, and you drift as gently as a jar cooling, into a sleep that keeps no records and requires no seal, where morning will find you the way morning always does, already partway to the ramp. Already counting without noticing, already practicing the exact knot that holds, and then, when asked nicely, let's go. You might not expect your day to be measured by the sound of corns waking up, but that is the clock in a worker's village when the stars are still yawning. Grainstones begin their quiet argument, the pestles take sides, and everyone agrees. That morning has started, even if the sun hasn't filed the proper paperwork. If you're still awake when I get to the part about the official size of a bread ration, you can subscribe, or just smile at the thought and let it drift away like flower dust and lamplight. I promise not to check. You sit up and the mat leaves. Its tidy little pattern on your skin, a receipt from the night. The air tastes faintly of ash and onion. You wet your fingers in a bowl, smooth the end of a linen kilt that has been sensible for years, and slide your feet into sandals that remember. Yesterday. Kohl goes under the eyes not to look grand, though it does, but because it makes the day less bright and incidentally announces that you have a tiny laboratory on your eyelids. A neighbor coughs in the polite rhythm of someone trying to start. A camel that isn't there. Across the lane, a child gives a philosophical lecture to a scarab which, like most philosophers, rolls away. The village is a box of small sounds, each one knowing exactly what to do. Breakfast is bread that could be used as a building material if life took a turn. Emmer loaves stamped with the seal from the granary arrive like little bricks with opinions. You soften them in beer thick enough to remember being bread. It is slightly sour, pleasantly alive, and domestic in the way that only a drink that has been stirred by 3 generations of spoons can be. Someone in the lane swears onion improves. I say someone else swears it improves honesty. Either way, it improves breakfast. You tie the ration cord at your belt, one knot for the loaf, one for the beer, one for the measure of oil that will make copper tools less moody. The foreman strolls by with a tally board, as if he personally invented numbers and is gracious enough to share. Your work team has a name painted in red on a scrap of board. The strong-armed, the drills, sometimes something grander like the Friends of Paeta, and you all pretend not to enjoy it too much. A scribe taps his reed on his lip, calculating how much stone a dozen men can persuade today. He writes in black for facts and red for instructions. The same way the day alternates between doing and being told to do. The walk to the site is a procession of practical theology. Someone ties a new leather thong around a chisel and murmurs to Peda, as if the god does tool fittings before breakfast. Someone else rubs an amulet of the dwarf boss and asks for good humor, which is not included in rations but increases productivity. The path crunches with old potsherds and the shells of tiny creatures who got lost a long time ago. You arrive at the big geometry in progress, and it looks exactly like ambition wearing scaffolds. Ramps climb in confident spirals. Plumb bobs dangle like small, convincing stars. The overseer holds a staff that translates hand signals into sentences. And the sentences are firm but not unkind, except on days when they are. A jar sits by the path with a damp rag on its shoulder. That is the water for the sled runners. Knowledge so old it is painted in tombs, and yet somehow always feels like a trick you invented. Copper chisels wait to be struck into needing a rest. Dollarite pounders sit with the dignity of stones that break other stones. You learn the quarry face as if it were a temperamental relative. The bedded layers speak in seams, and the seams invite wedges. Wooden shims drink water, swell like a boast, and the rock sighs back. The sound is low, sincerely geological, and never hurried. When a block frees itself, you and 3 friends come forward with ropes that teach the body about honesty. You are assigned to sled crew, and your muscles nod as if they remember from another life. The sledge's runners are coaxed with water. A boy with a broom of reeds spreads just enough to persuade the sand to act like a floor that went to finishing school. 30 men lean into a song that mostly consists of the idea of pulling and the promise of shade. Each breath is a unit, each unit moves a finger width, and a finger width repeated is a morning that makes sense. Someone adds a new verse about a colleague who once misread a cubit rod and built a short wall of surprising personality. The verse is bad poetry and perfect morale. At the foot of the ramp. Geometry becomes exercise equipment. The angle is kinder than it looks because sand is a patient teacher, but kind can feel long. You slide a wet line across the runner again. Lift exactly when the overseer with the flag shows you the idea of up. Enjoy those brief, delicious seconds when friction behaves as if it has taken the day off. When the rope bites your palm, you greet it like an old dog and remind it where not to bite. You pass the lubrication crew, the wedge crew, the chip collectors who harvest stone confetti for pathways and doorstops. Even the smallest pieces eventually become something that knows its place. A mason marks a line with red ochre that is so straight you feel a little straighter for walking near it. A scribe makes a note about how many jars of water were poured along the way. If water could blush, it would. And then, because pyramids are made of repetition rather than drama, you repeat all of this until the sun becomes a lecture you are politely not attending in the afternoon. The blocks are taught manners. You offer them sandstone rubbing until their faces are civilized and their corners learn to mime the square. Whisper-thin slivers fall away and pile into drifts that glint under gypsum dust. A foreman examines a joint by running a dry reed along it. If the reed snags, the world briefly stops until a man with infinite patience persuades the stag to reconsider. The plumb line hums in the light breeze, a faint music that says yes. Somewhere nearby, a team planes cedar for a sledge crossbar. The scent is a small feast and an impolite temptation. Your own copper edge begins to look thoughtful. You visit the brazier man at break. He heats the chisel, glows it to the color of a careful sunset, then quenching hisses like a secret the metal wanted to tell, but didn't. Oversight is a choreography of eyes and chalk marks. The overseer's stick is usually a pointer sometimes, a metronome, occasionally a reminder. Punishments exist the way scorpions do, mostly in the background and best not stepped on. A tally of lashes is kept with the same numb accuracy as a tally of jars, which seems harsh until you remember the rule of big projects. Everything measured is smaller than what it was. Most days, voices manage what sticks threaten. A lazy joke runs through the crews that the most painful punishment is having your name written in red more than once in the same line. People laugh a little too quickly, which is how jokes about rules function in any century. When the sun finally admits it has won, a horn sounds like someone blowing very carefully into a conch that wishes it were a trumpet. Tools are counted with a seriousness that tools appreciate. The rope is coiled with a tenderness that would embarrass poetry. Then everyone agrees to remember how to walk without a load. The village receives you like a brick receives a wall correctly. Familiarly, lanes bustle with jars and small goats who believe in themselves. Homes are tidy rectangles of mud brick with ceilings that are also shelves. The roof doubles as a thinking place in cooler months. Tonight the sky is on the warm side of argumentative, so the threshold will do. Dinner is a stew of beans that have learned patience, thickened with bread you held back from breakfast. There is a sliver of fish that someone acquired through both trade and storytelling. Garlic is chopped with a ceremony befitting a queen. The room smells like decisions. Over the door, the household god in faience watches with an expression that says you are doing fine and should wash your hands. You do. Vitron granules crackle like tiny moral victories. Privacy in the village is a theory, admired at a distance. Walls are enthusiastic about sound. Neighbors freely borrow a handful of salt and occasionally your opinion. Children invent a new game every 9 minutes. The rules are obvious too. Everyone under 12 and to no one else. The beer maker 2 doors down insists tonight's batch is particularly convincing. He says this every night and is occasionally right. The barber is also the doctor and the dentist by seniority. He shaves with copper that bites only when it is bored. He prescribes honey for everything that bleeds, natron for everything that doesn't, and quiet for all remaining categories. A seamstress mends kilts with stitches so neat even the scribes nod respectfully, which is high praise from men who spend their lives tiding lines. Hierarchy here is a gentle slope with a few bumps. Foremen live in houses that are almost like yours, but with better proportioned jars in a second shelf that appears to make decisions from a higher altitude. Scribes exist in their own climate, cool even when the wind is lazy. They carry pallets with balls for black and red, and they walk as if stepping over grammar. They can reduce a day to a rectangle of marks, which is either power or courtesy, depending on how tired you are. Priests visit with incense that makes the lane smell like a cloud that misplaced itself. They are pleasant. They bless jars, cats, tools, and sometimes arguments. The workers always smile in the right places and keep their conversations about stone and bread, because that is what the priests think the world is for. Above all of this floats the pharaoh, not unlike the moon, present without being local, bright without needing to explain how, a name inside an oval that the scribe draws with practiced affection. In the story told to children, the pharaoh commands, and pyramids appear. In the adult version, the command is a wind, and you or the ship. Rations are the economy of the lane and the most popular arithmetic problem. Bread is counted in loaves that taste faintly of history and pepper. Beer is counted in jars that behave the way time should steady, generous on festivals. Oil comes by spoon, and the spoon is strictly honest. On days of good output, there are extra onions. On great days, there is a measure of dried fish that makes the evening sit up a little straighter. The scribe with the reed hopes you will admire the neatness of his cords tied with knots that mean numbers. You do because it is polite and because the knots are excellent. Somewhere a young man tries to trade 2 loaves for a very handsome bronze needle. Commerce admires him and says no. Why you are at the bottom of the social structure is not complicated. Pyramids are convincing diagrams, and someone must be the baseline that makes the angle look true. You joke, without moving your face, that if the pharaoh wanted fairness, he would stand at the tip and the rest of you would fan out above him and enjoy the view. This makes a good laugh because it is completely impossible and therefore safe. Reality is kinder than jokes when you are tired. You like the work when it fits into your hands, and you like your friends, and you sleep so well, the mat applauds. Being at the bottom also means you hear everything that falls, including gossip, and fig-stop prayer begins as preparation and continues as maintenance. You touch the amulet of Taret hanging from a peg and ask her to watch over the baby next door, with the seriousness only a god who looks like a pregnant hippopotamus can command. You flick a few drops of beer onto the ground because even the ground likes to be included. At the worksite shrine, a priest intones syllables oiled by practice, and the ramp seems to stand a little taller in approval. You say the short version, think, you please, and the improvisation that applies to heavy loads. A colleague adds the exact words his mother said before weaving. He claims it helps ropes remember they are families of fibers. In the same way that some people hum when they lift, everyone hums a little when they hope danger is present the way a cat is. Present underfoot, uninterested in announcements. A slip at a sledge runner, a momentary faith in a frayed rope. A careless foot under a well-behaved block. All the usual opportunists. The village deals in practical magic. The boy with the broom has a reed ring he swears is lucky. Supervision encouraged this because belief is lighter than stone and easy to provide. When little accidents happen, a wise woman appears with a bundle of herbs and a look that dismisses panic as untidy. Honey is laid on cuts like liquid sunlight. Linen wraps are applied with flattering geometry. And pain is discussed the way one discusses weather, acknowledging it without giving it a personality. Exhaustion is managed like a dignitary, greeted. Offered water, seated in shade, and not allowed to make policy. You learn to divide motion into units the way scribes divide words, small enough to be friendly. You practice the old trick of cooling your pulse with a wet cloth and thinking of flat water. You keep a spare onion for morale. If a man has to stop, the rope closes his space as smoothly as river water closes after a boat. No one likes to fall short. Everyone knows the usefulness of stopping on the right side of foolishness. The overseer pretends the decision was his. The man pretends to be annoyed, and the ramp continues to be patient. A block occasionally misbehaves and spalls a corner. The mason sighs, squares the world again, and turns the flaw into an excuse to invent a better chip. Death lives in the neighborhood without gossip. When someone fails to return, the lane becomes very quiet the way a temple becomes very large. Work pauses as if the tools are listening. A small procession forms with practical hands carrying linen and the older men providing a respectful commentary about the man's habit of finishing knots correctly, which is the nicest praise their mouths know. There is no great saying as the body goes into sand. There is the exactness of placement, the certainty of name, the hope that the West is as restful as songs insist. Then bread is baked in quantities that insult hunger and satisfy grief. The next morning, a chisel is picked up by someone whose hand is almost the same size. The monument grows a little while you are talking about onions, which is how monuments grow. When you look up from rubbing a face true, a whole course has appeared at the edge of your vision. The outer casing stones gleam in a way that makes the sun proudly competitive. The angle pleases mathematicians and people who do not know they are mathematicians. On a clear evening, the shadow reaches further than a rumor, and children chase it as if it were a river of coolness. You press your thumb into the soft end of a rope to check the twist and think, with a calm that surprises you, that it good. Rope and a truthful line are recognitions, not inventions. Night returns with its familiar generosity. The kill at the potter's glows like a practical star. A line of wet jars reflects the moon as if the moon needed compliments. Jokes are traded for small coins. A scribe tells you about a sign that means the man who makes smooth. He considers you qualified and you feel taller. The barber files his blade against a little stone that sings. He says tomorrow he will cut the foreman's hair exactly straight, which is a prediction and a dare. Your lamp, wick trimmed to the obedience of a thin flame, makes the wall niche look like a cave that loves you. Sleep is a tool too, and you keep it in good repair. You lie down and the mat approves. Outside, a small goat argues with a basket and loses gracefully. Across the lane, someone practices the work song very quietly, as if tuning it for the morning. You count not sheep, but the knots of the ration cord. Loaf, beer, oil, the old arithmetic of dignity. In your palm, the skin remembers the rope, and your bones remember the angle, and your ears remember the low, contented hum of a plumb line agreeing with itself. The pharaoh's name floats somewhere high, round, and secure as the cartouche that holds it. You are very far below and exactly where necessary, and somewhere between the last thought about sand and the first dream about water, you drift into, asleep smooth as a rubbed stone, while the unfinished pyramid waits like a patient map of tomorrow, not asking for anything now, and not minding if it never learns your name. You might not think a day could be measured by the temperature of sand, but a pyramid worker learns that the hour before dawn is cool enough to be kind and late enough to insist you get moving. The sky is a pale bruise, the kind that promises to heal by breakfast, and the lanes of the workers' village are already practicing being roads. A quern begins to rumble 2 doors down, the way a sleepy bull might clear its throat. Someone hums a tune with only 1 note and 10 opinions. A jar lamp flickers in the doorway across from yours, showing a grand tour of insects who have decided light is a philosophy. If you're still awake by the time we reach the official weight of a standard bread loaf, and yes, the state cared about that, feel free to subscribe, or simply imagine nodding politely. Either action has exactly the same effect here in the dark. You rinse your face from a basin shaped like an idea, dab on finger-width streaks of coal that protect eyes better than a squint, and tighten the cord at your waist because today intends to happen. The sandals, repaired twice with the geometry of hope, go on with the sigh of old friends. The morning smells like ash, beer, and something green that is not yet a vegetable. You tear a piece from yesterday's loaf, convinced that bread fresh. From the oven is polite, but yesterday's is honest, and soften it in beer thick enough to carry advice. A neighbor is already seasoning a pot with onions and satisfaction. Someone jokes that onions improve eyesight, which is why the overseers see everything. Someone else suggests onions improve conversation, which is why the overseers speak so loudly. No one laughs out loud, which is the safest way of laughing that a foreman comes along with a tally board that looks suspiciously like a small door to the world of addition. He counts men, jars, sludges, and optimism. Next to him, a scribe carries the real power, a palette with 2 tiny wells, one for black, one for red, so the day can be divided into things that happened and things that should. He taps his reed on his lip when your team assembles 8 men who can make a rope look talented. Your group has a name painted in red on a scrap of wood. Sometimes the names are practical, like the East Ramp crew, and sometimes they are hopeful, like the Strong Arms, and sometimes, when the scribe is in a mood, they are suspiciously poetic, like those who smooth the sky. The name doesn't change. Work, but it is a pleasant thing to walk beside. On the path to the site, the air is cooler, which is not the same as cool, but the difference is worth waking for. Ropes hang from shoulders in earnest tangles. Copper chisels jingle in a way that makes metal sound cheerful. A boy runs past with a broom made of reeds, absurdly proud of a tool that can convince sand to behave. A priest pauses at a small shrine, halfway along, and tosses a pinch of natron into the brazier. Even the smoke seems organized. Men touch amulets as lightly as you might touch a friend's elbow in a crowd. You arrive at the ramp while the sun is still a considerate neighbor, and the pyramid greets you with that unfinished look large projects wear as a disguise. A plumb bob dangles like a bead with self-respect. A cubit rod leans against a tool basket, as if it were ruling the basket by law. The day's work begins with stone considering itself. In the quarry face, faults whisper secrets to men who can. Read rock like a gossip scroll. $8 pounder stones with professional habits kneel by beds of limestone and offer persuasion by concussion. Wooden wedges slide into shy seams and drink water until they remember they are trees and decide to grow sideways. Somewhere a crack complains into the morning air. The first block is coaxed free, and suddenly the world has edges. You and 7. Others get a rope under its opinionated weight. Fingers check the twist, palms accept tomorrow's blisters as a down payment on today's progress. The word for this is work, and it is a good word because it carries no adjectives. Sledges are wooden statements with runners. On dry sand, they dig their heels like mules. On damp sand, they glide like compliments. The jar with the wet rag is your silent colleague. A boy sprinkles water in a path so precise it might pass an examination. The moment the first pull begins, you feel that private miracle when friction becomes polite. A song starts because songs are leverage you don't have to carry. The words are astonishingly plain. Pull, step, breathe, now. But the tune is older than anyone's calendar and fits the body like a solution. The overseer, holding a staff that means his voice is official, moves his hand in the rhythm of agreement. Every dozen paces, the sledge stops and someone checks a plank. Someone else smooths the sand. and someone pours just enough water for the next sentence of motion dot at the ramp, speed becomes a story for other people. Angle is the boss now. But runners are drenched again and again, and you feel a tug in the rope as if gravity were signing a contract with your shoulders. Someone's foot slides and recovers in the same heartbeat. A reed whistle chirps, which is the foreman's way of saying no drama. The sledge quivers at a bad word in the sand and then obeys your insistence. At the top platform, the masons greet the block like a new student in a school for squares. They chalk lines in red ochre that are straight enough to improve posture. You lean against your own ribs for a minute while the jar boy passes. He offers you a sip and claims the water knows he's important. You agree because it costs nothing to be right about children. Blocks are introduced to their neighbors with courtly ceremony. Sandstone rubbers whisper across faces until two large things agree they are flat. A mason checks the joint with a dry reed. If it snags, the reed accuses the stone, and the stone blushes gypsum dust. Copper chisels return to the brazier man, who reheats their edges to the color of a sunset patient enough to learn metallurgy. The scribe notes how many jarfuls were poured on runners and how many blows a stubborn projecting bit required, because someone in the office of someone will one day write a report about the virtue of water and the expense of obstinate stone. When noon steps into the shade and kicks it out, the site becomes a collection of reasonable men pursuing unreasonable geometry in tiny steps. You might imagine the whip rules everything because it makes such an efficient symbol, the way a crown does. In practice, a pyramid is built by schedules, cups of water, and people who behave out of stubborn pride. The overseer's stick is mostly a pointer and a metronome. Lashes exist the way scorpions do, more in cautionary talk than in your field. A vision, but also more than none. A scribe keeps a separate tablet for discipline with the same neatness he gives to barley counts, which is an unsettling democracy. The favorite threat is having your name written in red more times than a scribe's ink well appreciates. Most men fear public scolding more than stripes. It is more difficult to forget. And when work is good ropes and harmony, sand cooperative, the stick becomes a walking stick again, and the overseer's voice lowers into the tone reserved for men who agree about angles. Afternoon work repeats the morning but tells it with fewer adjectives. Everyone is warmer and slower, but also better at pretending not to be. On the face of the core, the geometry keeps its promises. Levels sing their quiet songs as plumb lines lean into stillness. Someone measures the width of a casing stone with a cubit rod that has seen so much accuracy it looks confident. The chief mason sets the corner with a murmur that makes men pause. A tiny chip of limestone flies and lands in your hair. You leave it there like a souvenir of gravity. Far below, the village looks like someone poured a basket of rectangles onto the earth and then politely arranged them into streets. It is not yet time to go back, but it is possible to imagine going back. And that is what pulls a man through the second half of the day. Living quarters for workers are economical and optimistic. A house has 2 small rooms, a sleeping platform, a kill outside that doubles as a philosopher in cold months, and a roof that is equal parts storage, gossip, and astronomy. Privacy is more of a rumor. Walls faithfully transmit the news that a jar has dropped or a baby has decided the universe is too quiet. Courtyards share ovens, and ovens share bread opinions. Water jars line up like officials with terracotta bellies. A goat believes the washing reed mat is a meadow laid out for its personal poetry. In the evening, a woman with arms like competence kneads dough with the authority of a queen. The smell roams the lanes, offering diplomacy that no one refuses. The barber has jurisdiction over hair, beards, minor surgery, and opinions about Neutron. He sharpens his copper blade against a stone that sings like a cicada with ambitions. The dentist, sometimes the same man and sometimes a cousin, extracts blame along with teeth. The brewer down the lane produces beer that is pleasantly sincere and becomes surprisingly persuasive on festival days. A scribe rents out his ability to read labels on jars, which seems trivial until someone almost drinks oil instead of beer and decides literacy is a clever invention. Children conduct experiments in fluid dynamics with sand and water. They succeed to loud applause and then forget the results completely, which is an excellent summary of human history. Hierarchy here is a gradient. Foremen occupy houses that are your house with better jars. Scribes live in cooler air, both literally and metaphorically, a climate they carry with them like a second tunic. Priests arrive with incense, which lies about the smell of sweat with impressive conviction, and bless the lanes as if lanes do anything but allow feet to go where they intend. They remind everyone that the pharaoh feeds your rations by existing, and that the gods are paying attention even when they appear to be birds. The pharaoh does not visit, but his name does, written in a cartouche that behaves like a fence. Men trace it in the air with calloused fingers, as if to prove an invisible line can still be drawn correctly. News travels differently than stone. A man announces that a crew on the west ramp beat the east ramp's record by half a jar of wetting. Water per cubit. He announces this triumph the way a fisherman announces the length of a fish. Your crew resolves to win tomorrow without admitting that there's nothing to win. The baker's boy reports that the new granary clerk insists bread should be standardized to a particular loaf stamp. He has strong views on curvature. You all nod as if curvature matters to hunger. A woman mutters that her sister's husband has eyes for the sledge team and for a girl who sells garlic. Everyone agrees two humanities is too many. Priests and the state watch the project from inside stories large enough to cast shade. Official inscriptions will one day say that the king raised his hand and the pyramid wished to exist. You suspect the truth is more domestic. He raised the tax rate for brickweed and paid men who had arms, time, and families who appreciated loaves. On festival days, the work pauses and the village wears its best sandals. A procession visits the site. Offerings pile beside a small altar made of intentions. The ceremonial fan never quite keeps up with heat, but it makes the idea of coolness move in the air like a prediction. Someone places a wreath on an especially polite block. A singer praises the pharaoh's ability to tame stone, which seems fair enough. He also praises the pharaoh's brow, which seems generous. You clap anyway because the rhythm is excellent. Before dangerous tasks, levering a block near an edge, walking the last span of a scaffold that prefers to be the second. To last, men practice small rituals that are not in any handbook. You flex your fingers 3 times and tap the rope twice. A friend always says his mother's name under his breath and claims ropes are sentimental. Another kisses the charm of the dwarf god best because anything that looks like a cheerfully armed baby can only help. A priest recites words to Peta, patron of craftsmen and plausible outcomes. You do not know the full prayer, but you know the way his voice softens at the good parts. When you plant your feet and lift, the world briefly behaves. You make a note to remember the prayer and forget it immediately, like everyone else. Amulets. Multiply because they weigh less than caution and are easier to carry than fear. The hippo goddess Tora guards childbirth and courage with equal professionalism. A clay figure of her stands over a doorway and looks like she could argue with fate and win. The Eye of Horus hangs on a cord near the sleeping mat and seems to blink once every week, but always when you aren't looking. Some men recount dreams at breakfast with the seriousness of a weather report. A dream of falling, terrifying the first time, often means nothing and becomes another piece of morning conversation. I fell from the 4th course again. Did you land on reeds or on scents? Laughter, like water, lubricates more than sled runners. Exhaustion is managed by arithmetic. A block is not a block but 60 breaths. A ramp is not a ramp but the distance between weddings. A day is not a day but 4 loaves and as many jars as the scribe will agree to. Foremen learn the faces of fatigue the way scribes learn signs. The swallow of a man who keeps missing his grip, the set of shoulders preparing to argue with pain, the silence that grows where a joke would usually be. A good overseer adjusts the song before he adjusts the stick. On days when the sun forgets its manners, the crews rotate through shade with a choreography more precise than a festival parade. Accidents teach humility, even when you are already humble. A chipped edge falls and someone's hand is in the wrong. Paragraph of the story. A sledge kisses a foot that had no business being under it. The barber doctor unrolls his linen bandages with the gravitas of a judge, then applies honey to a cut the way the sun applies warmth, thoroughly. He says, "This will heal if you do nothing foolish," which is a prescription for half the diseases of the world. The injured man is told to rest, which he does until resting becomes noisier than working. By dusk he is back on the line, caring less, singing more. Death visits rarely, but never apologizes. When a man does not return, the village learned a long time ago to move slowly. Tools are laid down without argument. The women find the good linen. Someone fetches the small embalmer's chest kept in readiness, not because anyone planned to use it soon, but because the sensible thing to own is an idea of what to do next. A modest grave is prepared just beyond the ridge where the wind pretends to be thoughtful. There's no wailing lament belongs to richer courtyards, but there is something that looks like precision and is probably love. A small stele is inscribed with a name and the words, "Beloved by his crew." The line is both formula and truth. The next day, the rope will feel heavier and then lighter, and work will resume because the only way to finish grief on a project. The size is to keep counting. Not everyone will be painted on a tomb wall or named in a song. Most of you will be remembered by your houses, which develop personalities over time. This one always smells faintly of cinnamon from the day a merchant stayed too long. That one produces children who learn the words to songs before they learn the word for water. Your legacy will be a staircase inside the monument, where a block fits another block in a long argument that ends in agreement. You may never climb high enough to see the casing stones shine like a polished suggestion. You will, however, know the exact weight of a jar of water in a wooden ladle, the way a rope creaks when it is telling the truth, and the sound a plumb line makes in a cooperative breeze. Evening turns the village into a slow river. The potters. Kill glows like a disciplined star. A cat negotiates a treaty between mice and crumbs. Stories travel from doorway to doorway at knee height, told to children who will not remember the details and therefore will be excellent historians. A man shows off a new chisel point. Several other men admire it as if it were a newborn. A woman plucks a tune on a lyre with 3 of its strings missing. The missing strings do not mind. Someone complains gently about the new granary clerk again and is comforted by an onion. The moon behaves. The desert cools to the temperature of patience. You lie down under a roof with more cracks than leaks and let the day arrange itself for storage. The room is a tidy list of small necessities, a jar that could carry a marriage, a basket that once carried a goat, a reed mat woven by a cousin who has never met your feet but knows their size. The lamp raises its thin flame as a suggestion. Somewhere a scribe scratches a note about jars and labor and the difference between accuracy and truth. Your palms remember rope in the way a book remembers hands. Your shoulders stop arguing with gravity. The night roommate, the constant low. Tone of distant frogs begins their respectful discussion. You think about the thing you're helping to make. People will say it is for a king's body. They will say it is a ladder for a soul to climb, a pointer for the sun, a mountain that wasn't there but was wanted. For you, it is also this, a place where everyone you know poured time into stone, until the stones pretended to be time. Somewhere far above, casing stones will gleam. Somewhere far below, bread dough will rise under a damp cloth. In the morning, the path will already know your feet. If you are still awake, you could subscribe, or you could let that thought tumble with the sand outside and settle. The pyramid will not mind either way. It has decided to grow while you sleep, which is considerate, and you have decided to sleep while it grows, which is wise. You might not expect a day to be measured by the length of a shadow on a bread mold, but for a pyramid worker, the morning begins exactly when the shadow finally reaches the corner. That means the oven is hot and the foreman is. Technically, right? The village is a low chorus of coughs and querns. Dust wakes before people do, and the air tastes gently of wood smoke and unambitious onions. A jar of beer yesterday's patient and persuasive sits where you left it, beside the small clay shrine where a smudged figure of a god has been accepting the same 2 grains of barley for weeks. If you're still awake by the time we get to the official size of a state loaf stamped with a seal, so no one can argue with the geometry of lunch, feel free to subscribe, or simply blink in a way that suggests approval. The gods of algorithms are forgiving, and so are morning shadows. You pull on the same linen kilt that has outlived the 3 pairs of sandals and at least 1 ambitious splinter. The reed mat remembers your weight. Someone in the next courtyard is trying to persuade a fire to agree with the idea of flame. The village rooster gives a speech that sounds remarkably like last night's. You rinse your face with a handful of water, carefully unimportant. Smear coal along your eyelids because it keeps the glare thoughtful, and tighten the rope belt that refuses to be eloquent. The little ones wake, perform the miracle of becoming hungry without moving, and are rewarded with thin porridge that is brave but not talented. Your wife ties up her hair with a strip of rag that might once have been a letter. She hands you a lump of bread wrapped in yesterday's news, which is to say a leaf, and reminds you not to trade away your garlic for gossip, because gossip cannot be eaten. Even when it is very fresh-up, breakfast is a conversation with bread. The loaf is the regulation shape, rounded on one side and practical on the other, like a man who is pleasant until noon. You soften it in beer and listen to the sound a quern makes when it remembers grain. A neighbor claims he can tell the hour by the smell of the oven, which is exactly the kind of skill that no one can prove wrong. Someone else swears the state measures barley by the heget, so that scribes can draw nicer numbers. The boy from House of Jars runs past with the days. Ration tokens tied to his wrist, and the authority of someone who knows which foreman likes sesame. When the sun presses a coin of light into the alley, the village stands up all at once, like a field of reeds when the wind decides to be administrative. The walk to the site is always longer in the morning, because the legs are not yet convinced by the argument of labor. The path threads through dust that has been rehearsing. You pass the bakeries where domed ovens breathe like polite animals, the brewery where frothy jars stand in a row like officials with terracotta bellies, and the depot of ropes, each coil a sleeping snake that will later confess its opinions. A priest waits at the small wayside shrine, talking gently to a brazier that prefers to answer in smoke. He flicks water on your hands, a gesture that smells of natron and bureaucratic mercy. Up on the plateau, the pyramid behaves like a patient thought, present, pointed, and somehow larger than the conversation that produced a dot at the ramp. The day resolves into practical nouns. Sledge, roller, lever, jar. You join your crewmate. Men who have learned each other's footsteps the way scribes learn signs, and slip a rope over your shoulder. The foreman marks attendance with a board scored so neatly it could be a musical instrument. The scribe stands beside him with a palette where black ink records the world and red ink corrects it. They call your team's name, painted on a chip. Plank, something like the Friends of the East or the Strong Backs, depending on whether the scribe had breakfast. You spit into your palms, a ceremony so old it has forgotten to be a ceremony, and wait for the jar boy to wet the sand in the lane. He pours slowly, as if the earth were learning to read, and the runners on the sledge suddenly prefer to glide. It always feels like cheating, which is how you know it is technology. The first pull is the tight one, breath, heel, breath. The song starts itself, a simple thing with more rhythm than melody, a line for pulling and a line for resting, and a third line that reminds you why the second is shorter. The sledge lurches into cooperation. Ropes stretch with the flattery of new effort. When the ramp begins, the angle tells the truth only ropes want to hear. A reed whistle chirps from the overseer, and everyone leans together, 8 men pretending to be one larger man. Every few steps, the jar boy splashes the sand. He swears he can hear the runners say thank you. Halfway up, a mason jogs alongside with a hand on the block, as if he could steer stone with manners. At the platform, the block shudders to a halt, and the masons greet it with plumb lines and patient insults. A copper chisel, reheated until it remembers its edge, nips off a proud corner, and the air fills with the soft applause of limestone. Dust tools here are honest about their limits. The cubit rod, about the length of an argument, lies across a casing stone like a rulebook. The level, a shallow trough of water carved from a plank, declares floors to be oceans. The plumb bob hangs with a kind of moral authority that even overseers envy. Rope stretchers walk across the foundation at dawn, counting paces in a language only bodies can hear, and marked with red ochre lines that will still be right when your grandchildren think you exaggerated. No one actually knows which ramp is the best ramp. There are many, and each foreman believes in his with the faith otherwise reserved for crocodile gods. You suspect the pyramid is not picky. It will accept any method as long as it is repeated for an unreasonable number of days. Punishments are more complicated than stories prefer. The whip exists, of course, like scorpions and sandstorms and other reminders that the world can say no. But the thing that moves most blocks is the dread of being written down in red ink next to a word that means talked when singing was requested. The scribe notes such events with the calm satisfaction of a man who never pulls a rope. The overseer's stick is mostly a pointer, a way to demonstrate that this is the direction in which effort is currently fashionable. Every so often, he uses it to flick a pebble from the runner or to draw a diagram in the dust, explaining why you should not place your foot where it becomes a wheel stop. When a man truly misbehaves, he is sent to carry water on a day when water decides to be heavy. It is remarkable how quickly virtue becomes popular. Midday arrives with the sound of sandals loosening and jars uncorked. You crouch in a patch of shade that is smaller than you are, turn a loaf in your hands as if it were a map, and break off the section with the stamp of the grain store still faintly visible. The state insists on stamps. Bread without a mark is not illegal, merely suspicious, like a tool without a name. You eat slowly because the opposite is childish. The beer is sweeter at noon, which is one of the universe's better policies. A friend bites into a clove of garlic with the expression of a man who enjoys religion. A boy passes with a tray of dates that are barely fruit and mostly history. He offers them for 2 copper bits or 1 promise to help his uncle with a goat. You choose the promise. Copper is forever, and goats are daily dot after noon. The sand is the temperature of advice. Everything that could be soft becomes earnest. The crews move as if a thoughtful god were pushing them from behind. Not hard, just constantly. Blocks continue their long migration from quarry to intention. The masons lean over their work with the seriousness of bankers. A joint must be so snug that a story cannot slip between. A man they call Big Wrist taps the face of a stone and listens to its opinion. He says it rings like good bread. You nod, because while you do not understand, you agree. The overseer blows his reed whistle in a pattern that means last haul. The sledge shudders, the rope hums, and the sun finally considers forgiving. Everybody.evening drops back into the village with the kind of relief that makes lanterns look like superior ideas. The houses are lined up like sentences that were written by people who had similar thoughts about walls. Your doorway smells of crushed mint because your wife insists on the illusion of gardens. The courtyard oven is a friendly mouth. She slides in flattened loaves with a movement that turns heat into respect. Children run errands that are mostly excuses to be seen running. A neighbor repairs a sandal with a needle that looks as if it has participated in history. The barber arrives with his kit and cuts 3 men's hair and 1 man's excuses. When he nicks a cheek, he tuts and applies honey, which is the answer to more questions than you would expect. From a rooftop, someone plays a 2-string lute in a key called soon. The houses share their gossip with the ease of thin walls. In the next room, a baby conducts negotiations with sleep and wins only some concessions. Across the lane, an aunt declares that there is an entirely new method of lifting blocks which involves secret ropes, and everyone agrees that ropes are already quite secret. The scribe who lives near the well reads out the label on a jar pine oil for the honoring of forearms, and believes he has just saved a hand from smelling holy. He also notes a delivery of fish, 2 baskets of leeks, and a debt that will be resolved when the moon chooses a different opinion. Your own house owns a stool, which is furniture, and a chest, which is memory. On its lid sits the amulet of Tauret, the hippo goddess who is either adorable or terrifying depending on lighting. In this light, she is kindly and slightly judgmental. Like a favorite aunt, rank is everywhere and rarely loud. Foremen have houses almost exactly like yours, although theirs contain better jars and fewer children who are certain that sleep is optional. A steward visits sometimes, bringing with him a breeze of official concern. He talks about quotas as if they were pets. Priests arrive less often, but more theatrically. They carry incense that pretends to cancel the day and sprinkle natron on. Thresholds as if humans were fish to be salted. They explain helpfully that the pharaoh ensures your wages by existing, and therefore you should appreciate how tirelessly he exists. A man argues that if existence is labor, his youngest son is already an overseer. The joke travels as far as the bakery oven and is retired from service before any stick finds it. Your place in this arrangement is certain but not personal. At night you allow yourself one brief thought about the king. Somewhere a chamber is being polished by people who interpret the word smooth as a moral command. Somewhere a cartouche is being carved twice, once for each name the king prefers to be praised with. The idea is that your labor stitches sky and stone into a shape the sun understands. This is a comforting idea in the way that imagining tomorrows. Bread already rising is comforting. In practice, you grip a rope, you sing, you eat, you sleep, and the pyramid climbs a finger's width higher. If you squint from the roof, you can see the line of casing stones behaving like a quiet river that remembered to sit down. Before difficult tasks, each crew practices its private liturgy of luck. A man presses his right thumb to the left corner of a block and waits 2 heartbeats. Another whispers the name of a grandmother who is good at carrying water. He swears ropes are susceptible to family stories. The foreman mutters a standard prayer to Ptah, in charge of craftsmen and well-behaved chisels, and then adds a footnote to Bas, who appreciates jokes and sometimes takes them for payment. You touch the Eye of Horus on your cord because it feels rude not to. The priest of the wayside shrine swings a brazier and instructs the wind to learn cooperation. The smoke writes a sentence that all the men agree would be grammatically beautiful if they could read it. Fear is best managed in little scoops. When a block tilts on the lip of the ramp and the air turns thin, you do not imagine falling. You imagine the jar boy is about to pour water and you need to step where the sand will be shiny. You do not picture the new story the scribe might write in red. You picture the reed whistle choosing a more interesting bar. Evenings help. After eating, there's just enough light for a man to sort his day into baskets. The basket of good pulls, the basket of tolerable jokes, the basket of things that hurt and will hurt less tomorrow, the basket of children who want to stand on his feet to learn how walking works, and the basket of thoughts that must be set on the shelf where the amulets stand guard. Of course, the work keeps a ledger. There are weeks you cannot read the sky because your eyes belong to dust. There are days a rope leaves a sentence across your shoulder that it repeats the next day, just in case you missed the meaning. Heat invents new meanings for thirst, and sweat writes tiny hieroglyphs down your spine that only the breeze can translate. When a man stumbles and the block kisses his shin with excessive affection, the barber doctor wraps the leg with linen and patience, then daubs honey and says, "Let it be sweeter than your complaint." Most injuries are brief. The body is a cooperative machine with a long history of adapting to supervision. Every now and then, the story is longer. Death, when it arrives, has very little music. No golden boat awaits men whose pockets hold only sand. The village owns a set of simple boards for coffins that can be borrowed and returned with more respect than when they were borrowed. Friends dig where the ground agrees. A priest comes with a small book of appropriate sentences and instrument that sounds like a reed refusing to argue. The women sing from far enough away that grief does not knock over the jars. A headdress of wood is placed under the dead man's head because comfort is a courtesy even after arguments are finished. Some dates, a little bread, a jar of beer. A shard of pottery with his name scraped into it, things that say, "You were here, and now we are here," and the work continues in both places. After such a day, sleep is a small festival. The roof remembers stars. The mat remembers the shape of your choice to lie down. Conversations taper into domestic footnotes. A jar breathes in the corner as if wine could be anxious. Your wife wraps a cord around an amulet twice instead of once and declares the night officially improved. Children sigh the way reeds do when a boat passes. On the far side of the wall, the neighbor whispers the same joke he tells every evening about a foreman who tried to measure a shadow with a cubit rod. It is still not funny, which is reassuring. Somewhere on the plateau, a guard taps his staff against the railing, so the darkness understands its boundary. You think softly, so it does not become a plan about how the stone courses rise. Each layer is a sentence that only makes sense because of the sentence below it. Somewhere a mason is smoothing a joint you will never see. Somewhere a scribe is deciding whether a 1 belongs next to a 2 or whether a 3 is more realistic. Somewhere, the king, whom you have never met, imagines a stairway for the sun, and somewhere your youngest, whom you will see at dawn, imagines using the water jar as a boat. Your part is small and repeated, like the drum in a song that no one admits is their favorite. Tomorrow you will wake at the familiar hour when the bread mold's shadow touches the corner that means the oven is ready and the day is possible. If you are still awake, you can promise to subscribe later, or you can let the thought wander out back with the cats and the wind dash will dash it dash rain conversations. The ramp will wait, the rope will keep its shape. The pyramid will rise by the width of a thumb, then a reed, then a patience. The stars will decline to comment. You will breathe, and then the village will, and then the night will fold itself. neatly like a linen kilt on the end of a bed that is mostly a map. And in that quiet, even the dust lies down, briefly convinced it is snow. You might not think the shape of a loaf could decide the start of a workday, but in the workers' village, the dawn bell is really a small bread crust just starting to brown. The yeasty sigh that makes tired feet remember they have obligations. Shadows are still slack on the alley walls. The air tastes faintly of last night's ash, like the village has been slowly sipping from a smoky cup. You sit up on the reed mat that records, with perfect honesty, every pebble you forgot to brush away, and you feel for your sandals by memory, because eyes at this hour are negotiators, not witnesses. A small clay amulet of Torit watches you, with that calm hippopotamus confidence that says nothing dramatic will happen as long as everyone behaves like a jar. If you are still awake by the time I get around to the official length of a royal cubit, feel free to subscribe or merely nod. So slowly it could be mistaken for breathing. Both gestures count in the ledgers of modern gods. Before you speak, you drink. The beer is last evening's, and it has decided overnight to be agreeable. Someone in the yard taps a quernstone with a knuckle to judge if it wants to grind grain. Today, it replies with a sound like a patient drum. You splash your face from a bowl of water that keeps its small secrets, how cool it stayed, how far it traveled, how many hands promised not to spill it. Coal goes on your eyelids in 2 thumb swipes. Charcoal soft with fat and a pinch of chemistry learned from people who stared at the sun for a living. It is decoration that pretends not to be medicine, and medicine that pretends not to be. Decoration. Your belt is a strip of linen that has listened to every breakfast conversation you've had for years. Your wife breaks a loaf and steam hurries out as if it has remembered an appointment. She folds your ration into a fiber bag, adds a wedge of onion with the seriousness reserved for treaty documents, and tells you gently not to trade the onion for a story, because stories rarely fit inside a stomach. You step into a village that is rehearsing being awake. The ovens, round-backed and trustworthy, glow with the friendly red of a careful lizard. A boy from the granary jogs past with the stamped clay tokens that mean bread and beer, and sometimes a handful of dates if the foreman is sentimental. Rooster on a roof offers financial advice to the wind. Someone's aunt hangs laundry early so the sunlight will sign it first. She insists the clothes wear better that way. A priest from the little corner shrine sprinkles natron water along the alley and speaks to the dust as if it were an employee. Be helpful, be quiet, don't get creative. Your neighbor is already negotiating with his sandals. They squeak, which in this culture is considered an opinion. The walk to the operation is dust plus optimism. You pass the depository where ropes sleep in coils like patient snakes. The carpenter's shelter where wooden sledges lean on each other like tired cousins. And the water place where jars line up with the discipline of soldiers and the necks of geese. Up on the plateau, the worksite wakes in layers, like a giant rolling over under a linen sheet. The pyramid itself behaves like a polite mountain. It does not brag, it only continues. A scribe stands at the ramp's base with a palette of 2 inks black for everything the world accepts. Red for the bits that require caution, urgency, or embarrassment. He has already written down 3 names and 1 complaint about yesterday's rope, which he describes as opinionated. Attendance is counted on a board, scored with marks neat enough to make a reed blush. Your team 8 men who share a rhythm the way kin share cheekbones gathers around the sledge. The jar boy arrives with water for sand, his little job that changes the day. He pours a glossy road under the runners, and in that instant, every grain stops pretending to be a hill. A foreman raises a reed whistle that has only 2 honest notes, move and don't, and the move comes out first, as it always does. Shoulders lean into rope. The first pull bites into your palms with the intimacy of a handshake from a friend who means it, and the sledge remembers it was built to slide. Silver wet sand, wood on grit, the tiny cluck of the rollers finding their argument. The sound is a song with no chorus, an old rhythm dot at the halfway rest. You learn again that tools also have opinions. The cubit rod, polished from so much touching, that it reflects faces like water, lies against a casing block, and explains with great patience what straight means. The level trough, a rectangle of wood and a string of water, declares one edge an ocean and the other a mistake. Plumb lines murmur their vertical sermons. The mason taps stone with a copper chisel that has just come from the furnace, its edge, refreshed the way a man is refreshed by one extra day afternoon. He listens to the reply, a ring that means good grain, a thud that means disappointment, and he smiles with only half his face because that is all a craftsman can spare. No one agrees about ramps. Some overseers swear by the straight ramp, honest, as a road and visibly expensive. Others defend a spiral that wraps the pyramid like a scarf, out of sight and therefore theoretically clever. A few innovators have the audacity to speak of levers as if they were philosophy, not a stick and a rock. You pull regardless because the sledge moves only in the present tense. The wet sand trick continues to feel like cheating, which is how you know it's engineering. A jar of oil waits at the platform, just in case the runners start telling jokes. The masons gesture with their chisels as if conducting a very slow orchestra. The block settles with a sigh that might be your own. Punishment, like the sun, is more often promised than delivered. The whip exists, but it is mostly grammar, the exclamation mark at the end of sentences that began badly. More persuasive is the suggestion of being written in red, next to a phrase like absent without agreement or sang alternative verse. Foremen prefer to keep their voices. Shouting uses them up, and voices are valuable in a world where whistles only say two things. The worst assignment is carrying water uphill on the day the wind chooses stubbornness. Men come back from that duty converted to punctuality, the way pilgrims return from shrines with new jewelry. Midday opens like a lid, shade becomes legal. You sit with your back to a block that has not yet declared its personality, and you unwrap the bread. The state loaf is predictable as a favorite neighbor, slightly domed on top, flat beneath, stamped with a seal that claims the grain measured exactly 1 hecate, though everyone knows ladles are humble liars. You soften the crust in beer until it understands you. The onion is sharp and enthusiastic, the way advice can be when it has waited all morning to be offered. Someone has garlic and the world takes notice. A friend bites a date and announces that this is the sort of sweetness that convinces even gods. The scribe walks by and pretends to count loaves while actually counting fatigue. He is fluent in both. After the break, the day enters its philosophical phase. Heat becomes a concept. Sweat learns to write its own name down your ribs. You're careful with your feet on the ramp because ankles, when bored, will invent drama. The sledge groans once, more a comment than a complaint, and the foreman answers with a touch of oil. Another team sings a hauling song whose words are unimportant and whose beat is not. A mason's apprentice, proud of a new plumb line, holds. It's so still you could use him to tell stories about patience. Far up the slope, a casing stone glints where the sun finds it, and for a moment, the entire project looks like the sky practicing to be a mirror. Evenings are small villages inside the village. Men who are brave about stone turn gentle about jars. Your courtyard smells of coriander seed crushed against a palm and a flatbread, figuring itself out against the oven wall. Children run errands so short they might be circles. The barber makes rounds with a kit that holds knives, combs, and 3 increasingly improbable remedies. He shaves the heads of men and the arguments of boys. When his blade kisses a cheek too enthusiastically, he pastes on honey and says, pleased, that bees have solved more problems than priests. He might be right. In the settlement, honey is practically a personality trait. Houses speak their rank in a whisper. Overseers own stools that are slightly more certain of being stools. Scribes have shelves, actual shelves, where ostraka lean like shy teachers. Workers have chests with lids that squeak politely to remind you they are not empty. Everyone has maps that know precisely how tired their owners are. Lamps are shallow dishes of oil with wicks that pretend to be brave. A neighbor boasts of a new faience bead, and the whole alley admires it as if color were a festival. You can tell a steward has visited because his sin of expensive resin lingers like a foreign opinion. He inquires about quotas with the compassion of a man whose fingernails have never met limestone. Priests that glide through the lanes with portable holiness. One brings a tiny brazier that coughs myrrh and a feather fan, which is mostly theater. He blesses the oven, smoke blessing smoke, and ties a cord with a small wadjet eye above a doorway, as if to remind the door which side should open. He speaks about the pharaoh, who does the important work of existing perfectly, and about the gods, who request to be believed at regular intervals. You nod because belief is a polite currency, like lending a jar. He promises to say your cruise. Named by the big altar tomorrow. You picture the altar nodding in a way that implies compliance without endorsement. Inside the skull, the steeper part of the work begins. Plans do not assemble themselves. They arrange themselves in front of your eyes and ask you to agree. Before a dangerous lift, some men touch the left shoulder with 2 fingers. Others murmur the name of a river fish for luck. And a few simply stand in the sun until their fear becomes another kind of sweat. The foreman spits, not out of hostility, but to start time. You tighten the rope and remind the part of you that imagines falling that imagination is for evenings. The jar boy, who has never known a day when water was not heavy, grins at the sand as if it were a conspirator. The block behaves well, or else it is persuaded to. Failure belongs to everybody, and so does quiet. When a man slips in the world, jerks, the crew becomes a single animal with many hands. The sledge stops because 8 bodies decide to be a break. A knee bleeds like an orderly papyrus line, and the barber is there with folded linen and the honey he trusts more than any speech. The foreman looks at the robe, not the man, which is his job. The scribe writes something too quickly to be elegant, and then draws a little protective sign over the words, a private habit he denies if asked. Later by the oven, the hurt man will say it is nothing, and the bread will agree by being ordinary dot at the end of such days. Sleep has weight. But first the small liturgies. You wash the hands that have been stone all day until they remember they are hands. You rub a pinch of natron in your hair because your grandmother said so, and tradition is what survives usefulness. You scratch the kitten in the spot that makes it forget it is a hunter, and you nod to the amulet on the chest so it can record that you did your part. Your wife hums a rhythm that fits exactly between heartbeat and breath. A child asks if the pyramid will be finished tomorrow, and you answer yes, because tomorrow is a very broad word. Some nights the village carries its dead with the same practicality it carries water. The boards of the coffin are borrowed from the man who repairs sledges. He says wood is happier being useful than being rare. The priest speaks from a text that was old last century and therefore trustworthy. A necklace of dried flowers tries valiantly to be beauty one more time. There are tears, yes, and the frankness of grief that does not require performance. A pot of beer is set by the grave with a scrap of bread, and the kind of onion that makes a promise to the nose. Someone says the name of the departed 3 times. Someone else says tomorrow's sunrise will need more hands, and everyone nods. Not as acceptance, simply as equilibrium. You end the day on the roof because roofs know the gossip of stars. The mat is a set of promises stitched with grass. A breeze climbs the wall and asks if it may sit with you. You allow it the corners you are not using. From here, the pyramid looks like a thought the earth is proud to be having. You picture the course that went on today, the thin line of stone that will be invisible once everything is finished, and you feel a private gladness that invisibility and importance are more compatible than they seem. The reed whistle sleeps. The jar boy's laughter drifts up from somewhere, that bright sound that refuses to turn into history dot if you have the energy for numbers. You consider how the quarter cubit fits into the half, how 6 palms make a cubit, how forearms were once rulers and rulers are still forearms. If you do not have energy for numbers, you consider the simpler math of the day, pulls done, jokes told, slivers removed from thumbs, cups of beer that explain the world adequately. You notice that fear, once carefully measured, occupies less space than habit. You plan nothing beyond being where the rope is when the rope asks for you. You let that be a philosophy. It is as good as any. Tomorrow will resemble today, which is the most soothing prophecy. Your sandals will be where you left them, one slightly more argumentative than the other. The jar will be cool again if the night is feeling cooperative. The foreman will still believe deeply in ramps, and the scribe will still put more faith in red ink than in men. The bread will be the exact size of its seal, which makes the state happy and your stomach unsurprised. The pyramid will accept a new layer like a calm lake accepts a tiny boat. All the gods will maintain their hobbies. You will pull, sing, eat, and sleep, and in the ledger of ordinary miracles, that will be plenty, if against all odds you are. Awake long enough to hear me say this, you may subscribe by blinking once for yes, twice for still thinking, or not at all if the night has reached the part where even thoughts nod in sequence. The ramp will remember your feet without help. The rope will keep your shoulders shape until morning. The star that looks sharp over the quarry will blunt itself kindly behind a cloud. And the village, after finishing its last chore stacking, the bowls like moons, shooing the cats from ambitious plans, folding the day into the chest beside the amulet, will lie down together. The breath of it is long and even. The dust finally settles, and above the roofs, the pyramid waits as if it could grow in the quiet a little higher, a thumb's width, the measure of one slow dream.